to this? I'd be
Well,
curious.
it's not so much an answer, but it's a interesting scenario. So my parents live in a city in Israel called Herzliya Betuach. It's the nicest part of Israel. And the last time I was there, there is this huge mega mansion. Something like a palace, basically. And I said, who the heck built that? I mean, that's something that only a billionaire could afford. And my father was joking. He said, "Well, that's one of Zelensky's places." I said, come on, you're joking." In any case, and I have nothing but this rumor from a real estate agent. I'm not going to throw out an accusation, but we had a real estate agent that we know very well in that city over for dinner, and she said, yeah, through a trust company, he bought it for the family, and it's all walled off and everything. I could probably send you the Google coordinates, but I don't know, right? I don't know what his bank account is, but and I'm not accusing him of being a criminal or anything like that. I'm not making any type of defamatory statements, but look, rumors are rumors, right?
Back to the question that I had, Tara. You wanted to offer the context on the whole Zelensky, and also so you'd need to be here for this one also. So I know you had to go for 2 minutes. So as soon as you're back, let me know. He'll be back in 1 minute. But Justin, I'll give you the mic, and then I want Tara to speak when All Source is back with us. Justin.
Oh, good evening, folks. How are we doing? What great conversation. Really interesting details. The book on this, 2014, by Eric Schlosser, Command and Control, talks about 4 of the incidents. A few of them you mentioned, and yeah, I think more so than a nuclear war is just the sort of ineptitude that I fear. I mean, all of those incidents, and I think there's many of them have that same aspect of something went awry, right? Something went amiss and these guys got it wrong, and it was very, very close to being very, very bad. And I think that's probably the more likely case there. Now, on the back end, just as commentary, I do keep in touch with my Russian friends and, more importantly, my Polish friends. And the chatter right now is kind of like the calm before the storm. At least that's kind of the sense I get. And a lot of what I get is sometimes the stuff they won't answer. So I'll ask them. I'll say, "So tell me, what is happening? Are you still seeing the influx of of people trying to find shelter there in Poland? Are you still hearing the battalion sort of mustering here?" And then on the Russian side, most of these people are stateside expatriates, and I'm like, "How do you feel about this? What's going on?" And the answer I always get is really non-committal. In Polish they'll say, "Oh, pan wiesz," and they'll in Russian they'll say, "Oh, ty znasz," right? And they'll say, "Look, you know, right? You know how this goes." And so the sense I get is that a lot of these people don't want to talk about it, and that there's probably more going on behind the scenes. But they're really there's a lot of hesitancy to discuss this in a lot of detail. A lot of people just kind of want to go about their lives. And that's just the sort of chatter I hear among just the regular class. So these are people that are not involved in the military, not really involved in politics. These are people that I've known in my professional career and my years over in Poland. And I'm like, it's a really interesting scenario right now.
Also, I had a question for you. Not a question, but when you said that the likelihood of nuclear war was low, one of the things that I was thinking was, are you there, Alisos?
He is, bro.
I'm here.
Yeah. One of the things I was thinking was that would there not be an increased likelihood for Pakistan to use it? And the reason I was thinking was because if you look at the Pakistan-India military strategy, Pakistan's strategy is to basically strike first. And the reason for that is because when you look at the borders, it's heavily populated. And so if they were to allow India to strike first, you basically lose very quickly. And so, I mean, if they didn't strike first, and again, to strike first, you have to know that there's going to be a war. Would that not basically increase the possibility of
all it takes, like if you look at the Iraq war and the intelligence that the US relied on to decide to invade Iraq, you start to realize that either badly interpreted information or just purely false data, false information, is enough to trigger a country like Pakistan to take such action. But I'm sure there's a lot of processes in place, though. I'm sure Pakistan will
Pakistan's military strategy is to strike first? Because if they
Yeah, but
didn't,
if yeah, but I know, but they have to also kind of balance it out, and I'm sure there's lines of communication with India, and there's other countries that could mediate any similar conflict,
oh,
because
for sure, yeah.
Pakistan will know the repercussions if they take such a decision, um, would destroy their economy, and let's say that face severe consequences if they do strike first. Also, so I'll let you take that one, and now do you want to go to Tara and kind of comment on that whole
Sorry, when I said
Zelensky narrative?
strike first, it's not nuclear. It's not the nuclear strategy. I'm talking about the war strategy.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, yeah.
So,
Well,
it's
I
one of
wanted to speak to the question that you had, Mario, about Zelensky. And do you remember it was just a few years ago that most of the Western media acknowledged Ukraine as the most corrupt country in the world? And Zelensky, since 2014, when the U.S. backed a coup in that country, and they've now installed Zelensky. Just recently, I had an intelligence person share with me that 11 of the Ukrainian oligarchs had a meeting in London about 3 weeks ago. And, you have some connections to these Ukrainian oligarchs that we're talking about. They don't live in Ukraine. They live in Switzerland. They live in different parts of Europe, even the United States. And they are actually profiting from the war. And one of the assertions that's being made, recently at the UN Security Council, was that many of the weapons that were supposed to be going to Ukraine are ending up somewhere in Europe in the hands of
True,
terrorists,
true.
and
I've
also
seen.
in the black market.
I've seen, but then the question is, so this happens a lot in wars where weapons start and happen a lot with the collapse of the Soviet Union, where there's a black market for weapons, and some oligarchs or wealthy people take advantage of this to make money. But like, do we have some numbers? Because it just seems that people take this fact. And kind of I can use that as an example for the whole Nazi discussion we had earlier, the Nazism within the Ukrainian military, is that you take a fact, like a small group of soldiers that support Nazis, or a bunch of oligarchs that took some weapons and sold them in the black market, and then you kind of blow it out of proportion to make it seem like all of NATO support is ending up in the wrong hands, where it could be like 0.5%, which is not much above average. So this is where the question is do we have any numbers of how deep this corruption is? What percentage of weapons is ending up in the wrong hands? Zelensky making billions. Like, is there any evidence from that? Is that just people that are critical of the war using that as or blowing a fact out of proportion?
Well, actually, that's a really interesting question. And what I saw was, you remember CBS did their reporting and then had to withdraw it. But the percentage that was reported that is not making it is upwards close to 40%. And in fact, there was a former, and I don't remember, he was from England, but he was part of one of those battalions that fought in Ukraine. He said that whole convoys, trucks in the convoys with weapons would just simply leave and then disappear. And he testified to that. That was actually reported out by BBC even. So the average that you saw is between 37% and 40%. And what was reported to the UN Security Council might have even been higher. And the concern is that some of the weapons are very, destructive, that are getting into the hands in different countries. And then you had an African president that talked about it openly, that they're finding weapons that were supposed to be in Ukraine, in their country, in the hands of terrorists. And we're bringing concerns. But the UN Security Council, which is mostly a lot of times control the narrative by US and UK, did not want to, discuss that issue. And there's been a lot of suppression about that issue. I think it's now starting to get more and more traction. So what I've read as far as numbers has been 37 to 40%. And that might be too high.
What's the source of these numbers? Do you know?
Well, actually, that was interesting. Well, some of it came from the UN Security Council, but
there's
the
a
original
source.
was
So pro-Russian media has aired
CBS.
similar claims of. I'm just reading here.
It was
some
actually
citing
CBS,
some citing a retracted CBS report that included a source claiming only only 30%, claiming 30% of weapons sent to Ukraine made it to the battlefield. Only 30% made it to the battlefield. Obviously, yeah, that's a pretty crazy number. So I'm just curious to see what that source is, because there's only one source that
Yeah,
said
so
that.
the source is this one guy that made the allegation, and he was a foreign volunteer, and he told CBS, he's like, yeah, I'm stuck here in Western Ukraine. I saw a convoy with weapons go by. I have no idea where it went to. And so it's my opinion that 30% of the weapons aren't making it to the battlefield.
No,
And it's like,
I
okay, so
think
you got
that's
one
why
guy
if I may,
in
I think
Western
the
Ukraine.
UN Security Council had a pretty they had a professor, it was Dan Kovalik, who testified, and you can look that up on the web, and testified to exactly not only how many that weren't making it, but also different kinds of weapons that are being found in other countries. I mean, it was significant enough, Mario, where Interpol issued a warning about it.
Yeah, but
So
if that was the thing, though, you would see it, right? The Inspector General in the DoD has its own process to verify it. Congress has passed legislation. The Senate has its own legislation about this. The Foreign Military Sales has its own
but then why don't
process
we
of
have,
making
why are
sure
they
there's
not
U.S.
allowing,
personnel supposed to
why
be
are,
inspecting, making sure this is getting where it's supposed to. And
no,
every
but
country that's
I
provided
would
weapons has
dispute
its own
that. I
process.
would dispute that, because right now there's been legislation twice presented before the U.S. Congress where they won't allow that kind of actually asking for where these weapons are going, how many, and for accounting. And there's been a real
Because we
battle
already
in the
have it,
Congress.
right? The
Yeah,
Department of State has it. The Department of Defense has it. The Foreign Military Sales Program has it.
and
then
who are
you
they? And
also
who
have
are
a
they in
congressional
collusion with?
oversight,
They're in
Senate
collusion with
oversight,
Raytheon,
and then you have every other country's
Lockheed
in.
Martin. So the weapons
They're not
manufacturers
the
have a
ones
vested
directly giving these
interest.
weapons, right? Most of this is
50%.
coming
Okay,
from
wait.
U.S. stocks.
The DoD budget, right? 50% of the DoD budget goes to defense contractors like Raytheon, Lockheed Martin. So they have a vested. It's sort of like asking them to report on themselves. You need an outside. That's why Congress wanted to have, an accounting, and that's why they were trying to pass legislation to have an objective accounting of this, because the DoD has flunked its audit 5 times in a row.
Yeah, but budgeting versus giving 10 rifles from a closet is completely different.
Well,
and
not when you're
the
talking
actual
about
weapons
massive
inspection
weapons and
program and foreign military
$114
sales is
billion.
tightly regulated.
Yeah, but $114 billion in aid is going, and weapons is going to
That
Ukraine.
wasn't cold hard cash though. 114 billion, the vast majority
in weapons
of it
as well
was weapons valued. So there has been cash. I think it's like around 30 billion in actual money prints are going burr, but the rest of it was Cold War era stocks. M113s, Javelins, Excaliburs, you name it, right? Like actual equipment that was purchased a long time ago. And then we put a cash value to that and said, if this was sold, it would be equivalent to this much money. And that's where this number is coming from, 114 or 116 billion. The vast majority, over 80 billion of that, is actual hard pieces of metal, explosives, bombs, bullets, and not actually cash.
Yeah, but all it did was trigger that money to be spent through the defense contractors to build more. So yeah, like I understand it wasn't giving them hard cash, but it was actually coming right back into our system, into our defense contractors' pockets.
And not only that, when you have like Leon Panetta, and I'll mention him only because I interned for him, so I know Leon Panetta. He sits on the board of Raytheon. So when he talks about being pro-Ukraine on MSNBC or CNN, he doesn't mention, and they don't put underneath, board member of Raytheon Corporation. I mean, so this is the thing. There's such an interest in the amount of money that's being made in Ukraine. That's why people are talking about it being a money laundering.
Tara, if I may. Yeah, also, I'll let you jump in, and then I want to go to Colonel Jeff. Appreciate you coming up, Colonel.
So I think there's a fundamental difference, right? When we're having a conversations about the deployment of weapons into Ukraine, and like let's say the specific soldiers example, right? Oh, there was this convoy and it never arrived, and then I never said. Well, first of all, frontline soldiers don't have deep-seated integration and knowledge of the complex requirements of logistics, right? But what you're highlighting, Tara, and I think this is the jump you can't make. Logistics is a very complex military operation. It is the most complex aspect of it, right? I mean, it actually is one of the reasons why Russia had enormous amount of difficulties in the beginning of the invasion, because of the complexity of logistics, right? And so what you're seeing in Ukraine, a country that has not been structurized to handle, prior to this invasion, a mass flow of military equipment, and then showing in, and kind of sending it to the front line, that requires substantial amount of logistics. But not only logistics, it's also accounting, right? But this is a country that's at war. Tara, to your concern, if what you're saying is true, right? Let's say weapons are getting flown, right? Yes. Is there aspects of certain amount of weapons that are getting siphoned off and sent into the black market? Okay, yeah. I mean, I think nobody's going to argue that point. But what we would actually probably be seeing, if there was a significant concern, is we would probably have to be seeing very modern and very sophisticated military equipment being smuggled to black markets, right? For example, we have not seen, right, Stinger missiles that were given to Ukraine operated in the black market across either in African conflicts and insurgents or terrorist groups in Africa to the Middle East, Asia, et cetera. We haven't seen that. We haven't seen, let's say, javelins, right? We haven't seen, mortars, artillery shells, et cetera. So I think it's a stretch to, when you look at logistics and to say the complexity of a logistics operations and then the complexity of accounting, and to say how weapons can be lost in the tracking does not necessarily mean they're being sold in the black market. They can easily just being used, but it's difficult for Ukraine, in a country that is war, that has not set up a structure, let's say like the U.S. The U.S. has a very robust logistics network and logistics command called Transportation Command, U.S. Transcom, and to then have that expectation for Ukraine, which is a country at war, and what do the Ukrainians care about? I just want to kill Russians. So get the equipment there fast, as quickly as possible, and use it as quickly as possible, because if not, we're being defeated. I don't think it's fair to then tie that to say, oh, well, because this soldier said this, is going to the black market. No, it's probably because of complexity of logistics and accounting that those weapons are just being used, and that's it.
Well, it's more than one soldier, but I wanted to answer a question that Mario brought up earlier about just the the corruption in general. And you remember, like, just last week, or it was like the last part of March, the wife of a former Ukrainian politician, she got caught with 28 million cash at the Hungarian border. And then you heard earlier in the year, there was a couple caught with millions at the Swiss border, and they were Ukrainian. I'm answering the corruption question.
But these are in terms of corruption, these are, I know they sound big, but they're small numbers. You're talking about there's corruption is like hundreds of millions of billions.
Collectively, it adds up.
Do we have any numbers?
My counterpart, Mario, I think.
But I'm not. But just so you know, but I'm not saying. But just to be clear, I'm not saying there's no corruption. I'm just saying how big is that corruption? Maybe also.
This was a Ukrainian MP. This wasn't just a random Ukrainian.
Tara, I agree with you. Nobody. I think when you analyze historically, nobody's going to dispute this. Ukraine has ranked at the bottom.
Corrupt is crazy, yeah. As a country,
the Transparency International standard of corruption. Nobody's disputing that. But I would just counter that the country that has ranked even worse in corruption than Ukraine is actually Russia, right? And so if we're going to use corrupt, now you can make the argument, well, because Ukraine has issues of corruption, isn't in our interest as the U.S. to support it. Got it. But let's look at Ukraine, where they've ranked historically in Transparency International and ranking of corruption, and then compare that to Russia, and you will see historically Russia has always been at a worse level than Ukraine.
But also the difference. The difference of the equalizer is that when it comes to Ukraine's corruption, it's impacting the United States. So people who care about the United States, it impacts them.
Yeah, but it's
the U.S.
Yeah, Russia? It does. But no. I mean, in terms of military support, yes, I know. But is so is the solution not to supply weapons, or to try to fight that corruption, which I know there's efforts to do so?
I mean, the solution would be not to really pay for a proxy war, but that's a different.
That's a whole different argument. Yeah, we'll talk about corruption.
In terms of Tara's other point, I think it has extreme merit, and her argument was quite accurately put that not only have you got the corruption, but then you've got the deep underlying corruption, which is that the military-industrial complex, such as Raytheon, are benefiting significantly by making these decisions and in elongating the war.
Simon, can I
So
ask
that's
you
a
a quick
different
question?
layered
Simon,
level.
can I ask you a question before going to Jeff?
Of course you can.
Did you expect, so when Russia was amassing troops on the Ukrainian border, did you expect them to invade, or like everyone else, it caught you by surprise?
I mean, yeah, I didn't expect them to invade.
So what do you think of the argument being made that once I think if Russia did invade Ukraine, I don't think they'll cross Ukraine's borders and invade other countries. Okay, just to be clear, and I didn't think they'll invade Ukraine. But then my argument is, if that's the case, do you think if Russia, if NATO did not get involved and Russia invaded Ukraine, they would stop at Ukraine, or they could invade other countries as well?
No, I think they would have, when they went into Ukraine, if the US didn't get involved, they would have took the annexed regions and the separatist regions, and it would have stopped. So they would have took less than what they've taken now.
Okay, so Michael, less than they would have taken now. That's a pretty extreme statement.
I disagree. Absolutely.
Yeah, Jeff,
disagree.
go ahead. Go ahead, Jeff. Do you want to elaborate?
Yeah, so I mean, I was sitting at the OSCE with a bunch of ambassadors, 57 different nations. We watched the buildup. We heard the Russian lies. We knew that they were going in. There's a reason that the Baltics and Poland are completely scared, because, I mean, you even have hyperbole coming out of Putin and out of Medvedev to say that they're going to take more. So to suggest that this is going to end at Ukraine, I mean, that's it's ignoring the fact that there's 3 frozen conflicts still to this day since 1990 in Nagorno-Karabakh, in Moldova, in Transnistria, in South Ossetia, and Abkhazia, which is northern Georgia. They've continually invaded nations over and over again for the last 20 years. So to think that they're going to stop at Ukraine is almost comical.
And wouldn't that set the precedent as well, Slayman? Wouldn't that set the Von? I'll give you the mic. Yeah, I'll give you the mic, Von. Just 2 seconds. Wouldn't that also set the precedent? Actually, Von, I'll let you push back before I talk about the narrative. Go ahead, Von.
Oh no, I'd just like the speaker to expand on Nagorno-Karabakh, because I'm very familiar with that conflict and that region, and a lot of people get it wrong. So I want to.
So Von, can you tell us more? Yeah, tell us more. Which conflict it is? What are the basics? What do we know? And then where do you guys disagree? So I want to understand it.
I mean, I want him to expand on it before I interject.
Jeff, do you wanna expand on it?
Sure, I'm happy to expand on it, but your question's disingenuous. I'll point that out at the beginning. You want me to expand on it so that you can tell me that I'm wrong. The point of the issue is it's between Azerbaijan and Armenia. I know it very well. I studied it from diplomatic perspectives. It was Azerbaijani land. The Russians actually came in, helped the Armenians establish a breakaway region called Nagorno-Karabakh. And as a matter of fact, over the last 20 years, Russia has been basically the puppet master, selling arms to both Azerbaijan and Armenia, making sure that there's some kind of level of balance, so there's no, vacuum of power in the region, allowing kids in schools to be freaking shot by snipers across the freaking border region. It's absolutely unbelievable. But now I'm going to let you go ahead and tell me where I'm wrong. Von. Okay. Yeah, great.
Yeah, Von, we'll give you the mic to push back on Jeff. And before that, Sleman, the question I also wanted to add, after Von and Jeff discussed the Azerbaijan and Armenian conflict, is not getting involved in Ukraine, wouldn't that set precedent for other countries as well? Obviously, Taiwan being one example. But if other countries see, holy shit, Russia just took over the biggest country in Ukraine, one of the biggest country in Europe, and one of the biggest countries in the world, and they faced little to no resistance, no involvement from the West. And then over the next decade, we could see this happen significantly more. I think there should be consequences. There was no consequences for Georgia, limited. There's no consequences in 2014. Shouldn't there be consequences when it crosses such a big red line? Again, I understand both sides, but I wanted to kind of put that out there. But Von, before me, Slayman, and Tara go back and forth on this, I'll let you quickly respond to Jeff.
Thank you. So, Jeff, are you suggesting that the pogroms in Sumgayit and other places didn't happen, like it was a picnic? Or are you? I noticed you glossed over the NKAO, because that's a disputed territory, the former Nagorno-Karabakh Autonomous Oblast, whereas Nagorno-Karabakh refers to the entire region. So that says to me, because that's an Azerbaijani talking point, so that's to me that you're either unwillingly or willingly conflating the two to like kind of not touch that whole aspect of the large Armenian majority that held a referendum, voted for independence, which is in accordance with Soviet law, because this happened in 1988, and then the pogroms happened, and then the fighting started. And I noticed you left out, you didn't mention Operation Ring, where the Soviet Union sided with Azerbaijan, and then after the dissolution, because the war went on until '94, Russia under Yeltsin decided to support the Armenian side, and there's a whole thing with ethnic cleansing that you're just glossing over, and that whole point of self-determination, legitimate referenda on sovereignty and all that. No. Let's just skip all over that, right? Feel free to push back.
I welcome the opportunity. Number one, a referendum at the end of a gun barrel is not a freaking referendum, and we both know that, and we just saw that in Crimea in 2014. Okay, so
gun
please,
barrel? No. 1988. Where's the gun barrel? Where's the gun barrel in 1988?
Oh my God, Jesus!
No,
okay,
you're lying.
Hold on,
Come on.
Von. Yeah, let's. I'll let you push back right after Von, so you can push back on what you consider lies, Jeff.
Okay, so in the OSCE, they have a function called ODIHR, which actually goes out and monitors elections. Okay, if you want to win the Azerbaijan, Nagorno-Karabakh, and Armenia issue, dude, I'll give it to you, right? If you're that passionate, that's fine. But that doesn't take away South Ossetia, Abkhazia, and Northern Georgia. It doesn't take away Transnistria in Moldova. And it doesn't take away Transnistria and Moldova, by the way, in the last freaking 6 months, where Russia went in and wanted to start massing forces again. So
kind of, Jeff, because of your point, moving away from Azerbaijan and Armenia, you kind of, yeah, so Jeff, the reason I jumped in is kind of made the point and bringing it back to setting precedent for other countries over the next decade. And Russia has, done this a few times, not on such a scale as what we're seeing now. Where do you draw the line? Maybe Slaman, you want to go first, and then we'll go to Tara and Snekotron.
First of all, I'm glad that.
But Jeff, you see the point, yes, Slaman. You see my point?
Yeah. I see the point. First of all, I appreciate Jeff conceding the point of on, because that was an important point. In terms of coming back to this issue at hand, I don't agree that it sets precedent, because you have a scenario where this is just, in my view, propaganda that basically Russia were going to take over the whole of Ukraine and they were going to invade the whole of Europe. It's just dramatizing the situation. Yeah, Russia did invade.
I think it was dramatized. Yeah.
Yeah, they did invade. In my view, they were going to take the separatist regions and the annexed regions. And because they're predominantly Russian, obviously they voted to be part of Russia, to be separated. Obviously, Jeff's gonna do the normal talking point is that it wasn't a fair election. That's fine. They could have done a fair election and have the UN and Russia join oversight if they wanted to. And in reality, that's where it is. So I don't agree that there was this concern, and I don't believe that it's the same as Taiwan.
But then, Simon, where do you? No. I'm not saying it's the same as Taiwan. It's not. But I'm saying, where do you draw the line? Like, allowing a country to invade the sovereignty of another country. We're talking about not a small, tiny little country like Taiwan that was part of China, etc. We're talking about one of the biggest European country.
Well, again, the issue is this. First of all, the issue is this: like, I'm against any type of war, so I would never be a good leader, because I wouldn't have done anything, and I would have let Ukraine continue to be supplied by the US, continue to have the weapons in the US, and unfortunately continue to use those weapons against innocent people in these separatist regions. But then you need.
I don't think. Hold on. Did Ukraine? Sorry, when you say Ukraine used this against innocent people, was Ukraine intentionally killing innocent people? Or was Ukraine fighting separatists? Maybe they did a fucking shit job. I'm sure there's exceptions where innocent people were killed. But I think, and that argument. Sorry, so the argument goes both ways. I'm sure Russia's point is not to go in and kill all the innocent people, and I don't think Ukrainians' point is to go in and kill all the innocent people. I think this is just the ugly side of war. I want
to ask you a question though, because this argument that Russia was only interested in the Donetsk and Luhansk People's Republic, right? The quote unquote separatists.
They were interested in the denazification, and I think
wait, Tara,
Mario.
Okay.
Yeah.
But if I may, because this idea that then, if that's the case, if you're going to launch an invasion for that primary military objective, it makes absolutely no sense that you're going to launch an offensive, your main military effort, through the north, through Belarus to Kyiv. right? The Russians did this in the past, by the way. Like, let's not forget that Russia did not invade the Donetsk and Luhansk People's Republic in 2014 and 2015.
Look, when you look at the map and you look at how this began, there were 14,000 Russian nationals that perished from the Kiev regime, from shelling almost daily. And I mean, if you talk to some of the international reporters that are on the ground in the Donbass region, if you talk to some of the people whom I've talked to that are there, they wanted Russia to come and help them. They were being targeted by their own government, and their language was being
But
outlawed.
Tara, I would heavily push back on that. I can go
Also,
to the Battle of Mariupol.
14,000 people, over 10,000 were troops, right? 6,500 were pro-Russian fighters. 4,400 were Ukrainian armed forces.
And children. And I
No,
talked to a
military
child
personnel.
actually who's on the Ukraine ministry kill list. And I've seen her picture on the website of the Microvets kill list. The Kiev regime is targeting Russian nationals. Like, they just outlawed the prayers in Russian in the Orthodox Church. That just happened today.
Why do they
I
do
mean,
that?
there's been a targeting of Russian nationals started. More.
All right. So also Saleh replied in Skit, so you can jump in right after, and Sneeko.
So so let me just go back. I'm gonna go all the way back, right? Because this argument
have to go back to the
constantly
50s.
comes up. Okay, hold on, Tara, if I may, because so I literally am so confused. One of the main criticisms that I consistently hear about American foreign policy, besides the hypocrisy, whatever, but is this idea of, and especially from Russia and China specifically, has consistently been, do not get involved in the internal affairs of another country. That's the main argument of Syria, right? If it's Iraq, whatever, like every country where the US
okay, let me
finish.
Guys, yes, let's finish off. So also Skit, also Sneekotron, Tara, Skitzer. Go ahead.
So what I'm saying, so that's the main argument that can I consistently hear, right? If your argument is that Russia had the right to invade Ukraine because they're Russian speakers and inherently Russian speakers want to be Russians, which I think that's a fallacy. That is not the case. That has been shown consistently that is not the case. But if you want to make that argument, then the notion is that countries do not have the right to dictate.
It's also 2 seconds.
It's only fair if America does it to other countries. So when
guys, too many guys. Ian, 2 seconds.
I mean, it seems absurd that you're attacking
Ian, I know.
Ian does all the damn time.
Just 2 seconds. Okay, Ian, 2 seconds, bro. Sliman, which particular point did you just push back on?
What all sources' argument is that these regions consistently and unequivocally wanted to remain with Ukraine. That is just not right. That's not accurate, unless I'm misphrasing what he said. But
is that what he said also?
That's not accurate.
So I mean, okay. So let's look at the data. Let's look at the data. Like, if you're saying, okay, what areas of the Donetsk Republic, People's Republic, which is what Russia, Ukraine has independent and then annexed. So let's look at the Donetsk Oblast. What specific region? Where's the border? Is it the entirety of the Donetsk Oblast? Like Kherson. Let's look at Kherson. Kherson Oblast, that's technically under the Russian Constitution. Like, where's the border? Because Kherson didn't want to be part of Russia. Zaporizhia, so Zaporizhia Oblast.
Okay, but where are the, you said let's look at. You said let's look at.
The city of Zaporizhia.
You said let's look at the statistics. Did you have any to share or?
Yeah,
not putting on the spot.
Okay, let's look at specifically Zaporizhia. Let's look specifically at Zaporizhia right now. The city of the Zaporizhia Oblast. The biggest city of Zaporizhia does not want to be part of Russia.
That is just the weakest argument I've heard in my life. That's like literally saying, guess what? Scotland voted not to be separate, but guess what? Let's look at Glasgow because they voted to be. That's just a weak argument. Also,
you're making the argument that they all want to be part of it. That's the whole point.
Less than 20% of the population voted, when over 80% of the territory in these Russian annexed lands are under Ukrainian control. So what all sources are saying is important. If we look at, say, the shelling,
let me. What about this? What about even?
It's the weakest argument I've ever made.
So let's see. Hold on.
Where's the border? Where's the border? Where's the border? Right? 80% of the population didn't vote, and 80% of the land isn't under Russian control. Where's the border? How was there an election when when
So
80% of the
basically,
people
what you're
weren't
saying
there.
is there's an election, but you, as a basically someone who supports war, are not accepting that because you want this war, you want your pro-Ukraine.
So
So
you're saying
make the
because like
argument.
five
So make the
people
argument and
voted
see
that
why
that's
Schizo,
a
can
fair
you,
free election?
and say that
Schizo,
what
for me to understand what's going on, let me just one person at a time. So, Slimane, can you first objectively tell me what that weak argument is?
so their argument is, guess what? Don't take the entirety of the area as a whole, but there's certain pockets within there that do not want to be part of Russia, and hence vis-a-vis, we now need to apply that to those specific areas. It's like basically making the argument that, you know, in UK we had a referendum in Scotland, and Scotland voted that they want to stay with the UK, and the vote was very close. But if you were to separate certain areas in Scotland, they would have said they want to be part of, they want to separate. And so it's basically
Yeah, but
looking at
in
looking
Scotland,
at
the
Okay,
certain
hold
entirety of
on. So, okay,
Scotland
I
voted.
got
rather
I
No,
got the
that's a
argument.
bullshit
Sorry,
argument because
Slimane, hold on.
Scotland, your
Right,
example.
guys, I got the point. So, Schizo, I'll let you make your point. Like, where's your argument? I understand
Yeah,
Slimane's
so
position.
this whole Scotland thing is a crappy example because with the Scotland case, right? Everyone in Scotland voted. In the case of Kherson and Zaporizhia, the vast majority, over 80% of the population, was not present for this election. And in terms of the control, right, the line of contact, the Ukrainian military controlled the
why
vast
weren't they
majority
present?
of the
Why weren't they
land of these
present?
oblasts.
And where's
So
the
how can
evidence that
you
they were
say this
present?
was a fair, free election when barely anyone showed up and it was under the barrel of a gun in Zaporizhia,
I mean,
right?
yeah,
There's
that's the
videos of
common
Russian
argument.
troops
That's
pointing
literally the
machine guns
argument
Okay.
at
Jeff
people
used
at
as
the
well
booth.
before he got
And
refuted.
how is
That is
it,
not
how is
true.
Every election that you disagree with is
and
under the barrel of a
also,
gun,
where's
and
the
every
border? So
election that
Russia
you agree
says
with is a free and
Zaporizhia,
fair election. It's
right?
the most ridiculous argument.
Okay, Slimane, I couldn't hear you because Schizo was talking at the same time. You guys got to stop that. So, what were you saying, Slimane? What was the last point? Now I want to move on to
Yeah,
Snekotron to
yeah.
kind of go
I
over
mean,
the other point.
it's just pure propaganda. Basically, what the argument is this: any election we agree with is under the barrel of a gun, and it was the same argument Jeff was using until he got refuted by Von. And any election that we agree with, that's a free and fair election, except when internally we disagree with it. Then we said the election is
It's not
then it's not.
refuted, by the way, about the election in Crimea. The referendum in
Right.
Crimea was a referendum by the end of the gun.
Yeah,
I
I
did
just want
not.
to speak on an
Snekotron,
earlier
yeah,
point.
hold on. Snekotron,
I've been
let's go
waiting to
back to.
speak on the weapons
Yeah,
smuggling thing
yeah.
for a little while now.
Yeah, no,
Yeah,
man.
I mean,
If
let
you
me
don't.
explain
Okay,
let me
hold on,
explain
bro. Just
the
first.
mechanics
Yeah,
of how this
before.
works.
Bro, just 2
Well,
seconds.
let
Make
me
sure your
explain
mic
the
is.
mechanics of how this works. I want.
Snekotron, I don't know if you can hear me, bro. Now you can. Make sure your mic's close to your mouth so we can hear you, man, because it's a bit echoey. Go ahead, bro.
Mario, it doesn't help when you speak
Okay.
over him whenever he tries to speak. Like, let him speak.
Yeah, I was giving
Right.
him the mic, Ian, but he kept speaking. I was like, Ian, Dr. Snekotron, take the mic, and I wanted to
Okay.
ask him a question, but he was speaking constantly when I was asking a question.
Oh, okay.
And now I'm telling him to put the mic close to his mouth so we can hear you. Go
Right.
ahead, bro.
Right. So I was looking. So the thing about the weapons smuggling and what is being smuggled. Well, I mean, first of all, these are only light arms that perhaps entering the black market. The way this works is because of the complexity of logistics in this, where you have the weapons arrive in Ukraine and they're actually then split up and loaded onto like individual cars or buses or vans, or you know, on individual small rail cars, maybe one or two echelons. Like basically, they have to sort of like they have to break up these shipments and spread them out so that they won't be vulnerable to airstrikes or, you know, missile strikes or, you know, detection. Because every once in a while you hear about a large ammo depot going up because he got hit by a caliber or something. I mean, the reason, so basically when you split this up, there are a lot of people involved and stuff gets lost. People can divert it. There have been a few cases already, where they had to go through the confiscation waves in Western Ukraine. They found like Javelin missiles in people's basements. A lot of this stuff is just like hoarded. It's just, and some of it is actually, some people actually found like weapons like buried in the woods, like basically, and people may have forgotten about them or they were planning to retrieve them at some later time. But this is the kind of reality when you have this very complex a logistical operation. I mean, some of it is being diverted to foreign markets. I'm sure, like not so far, we haven't seen stuff like Stinger missiles. We might have seen a few anti-tank missiles get diverted, but overall, like, you know, a lot of stuff just gets lost. And, you know, it's not incompatible when somebody says, "Oh, only a third of this arrives at the front." Like maybe only a third of it does get arrived at the front. Some people siphon off in their own unit supplies along the way, or somebody decides to take it and put it in the basement. Somebody else decides to bury it in the woods for safekeeping. Like all kinds of shit happens.
Hold on a second. You made a good point, bro. But like then you kind of slipped in like maybe only 30. First, the 30% statistic is no backing, so just one random person mentioning it. But I like how you said
yes,
like,
I know.
Maybe
I know.
yeah, but I like how you said maybe only 30% makes it to the battlefield. But that's
Well,
fine.
no,
That's
of
normal.
that
That's a
shipment,
crazy number. Yeah.
of
Oh,
that
okay. That's
shipment. Yeah,
okay. Go
of that
ahead.
shipment. Like, there have been reports where people said, like, where's our stuff? Like, we don't know because, like, by the very virtue of splitting this stuff up, like, it may arrive, it may not arrive. There's a dice roll involved, right? When something's split up this much, where you're loading up packets of ammunition and small arms in individual cars, like this kind of shit can happen, right? And yes, and there have been several rounds of competition.
Hold on, Sakato, on that point, and maybe Ian, you could touch on that. On that point, Ian, do you think it's a fair argument, before we go to other speakers, do you think it's a fair argument when you say this is, historically speaking, the amount of weapons sent to Ukraine dwarfs most other wars that had foreign support, okay?
Yeah.
Looking at the logistics of this, along with Ukrainian capabilities, including the corruption they face, it's like a mix that's bound to have flaws. I don't think the argument of most weapon, I'm sure there's going to be mistakes, things that can be improved, but I don't think it's an argument to be made. There's other better points to be made for not supporting Ukraine militarily, if that's the argument you want to make.
I mean, it really depends who's making the argument, right? I mean, if you're Russia, and that would be a silly argument for them to make. I don't think they're making that argument. But if you're Sweden, or if you're Finland, or if you're one of these countries that's currently affected by crime in the region, and you're concerned about the appearance of illegal firearms, high explosive weapons, rounds that are banned, like bulletproof stuff that can penetrate bulletproof vests and vehicles, right? Then it would be a legitimate concern. I think you can make that argument if you're one of these countries and you're affected by it, right? I think the police commissioner in Sweden, right, he actually made that argument. He said that a lot of the weapons being sent to Ukraine are winding up in the hands of gangsters locally in Swedish cities, right? They've seen the use of grenades, for instance, and the use of automatic firearms, which are typically just not available over there. So I think you can make that argument, although on a broader scale, probably not, because it's not like the weapons that are being smuggled are, tanks, right? That's not what's happening. It's not helicopters, it's not tanks, it's not missiles. It's typically smaller weapons. But there is a concern about manpads, though, because if manpads, and these can be used to take down civilian aircraft. So all it takes is one, right? This is a major concern, and I do think that fortunately there's a lot more tracking that goes on with weapons like that, but there is still a liability there. That what happens if I don't know, say a terrorist group or gang gets their hands on a manpad and decides to perform a terrorist attack? I mean, we in Colombia in the 1980s. What's his face? Pablo Escobar used a manpad to take down a civilian aircraft in his war against the Colombian government, right? So that is definitely a concern, and it's something that we will not even know about the ramifications of for years from now, right? After this war is over, years from now, we'll see crimes being committed and perhaps even a terrorist attack being done with weapons that were intended for the defense of Ukraine. So absolutely, it is a concern. It's just not a pressing one right now because it's something that politicians, especially in the United States, I mean, they operate on 2 to 4 to 6 year terms, simply do not care about. They're not thinking about it, right? But what happens 10 years from now? All those weapons. Fun story in the 1980s when the CIA was arming the Mujahideen in the 1980s, right? What was essentially they became the Al Qaeda, right? In the 1990s, they actually started buying back a lot of the manpads that had sold them, right? They actually kept an inventory, a tracking list of all the weapons that given them or sold them, and actually bought it back from them at a higher cost to ensure that they would never use a manpad on a civilian aircraft or whatever reason, right? Or even sell it to a different organization. So they actually bought back these weapons. I don't think that such a system exists right now in Ukraine, right? I don't think the proliferation of weapons that are landing in the hands of Ukrainian militants or the Ukrainian military, or in the case of right now, a lot of it's being exported to the black market. I don't think that's being tracked quite as well. It's not quite as efficient, even though we do have better technology, better tracking technology, and all these things. They're not quite as diligent in doing that because for whatever reason, the people in charge, I think Rand Paul, right, Senator Rand Paul, actually raised this as a major issue for why he was opposed to further arming Ukraine, because he said that there was no oversight, right? Not enough oversight. There was oversight over things like tanks and helicopters and things like that, and bombs, but not so much with the small arms. And he wanted to have an actual tracking system, and they actually shot him down, right? He has tried to actually put this in multiple bills, multiple times, even as an independent bill, and he was simply shot down every single time because it was insufficiently pro-Ukraine, right? That was like the reasoning that they gave him, right? The Senate is run by a bunch of idiots, but that's a different matter. So I would say that in this case, it is a concern, and it will become a real situation 5 to 10 years from now when an airplane carrying 300 people is going to get shot down, while it's taking off from an airport. So that is something we can certainly look forward to.
Hey, you mean like the 53rd Anti-Aircraft Missile Brigade that shot down MH17?
1 second, Intel. I want to bring Jeff in. Jeff, what's your thoughts of that? Do you share the same concerns as Ian in terms of what's going to happen to those weapons in the future?
Yeah, so it's absolutely a valid concern, and you're right. The United States actually did buy back Stinger missiles from the Mujahideen at higher prices. As a matter of fact, if you go to the State Department, there's actually a State Department program out there that actually goes out and searches black markets and buys them back on at higher rates to try and make sure that IR missiles, shoulder-launched man-pad IR missiles, are actually removed. But I would say this: I mean, that they're Mario, you brought up the issue of the Foreign Military Sales Program. In the Foreign Military Sales Program, there's an end-use monitoring requirement that falls on every embassy, and it's the Office of Defense Cooperation. In there's a bunch of people that every year have to go out and monitor what a nation has, whether that's night vision devices. And when I say monitor, they got to go look at the serial number. With respect to Ukraine, the Defense Department, which actually has the biggest skin in the game to make sure none of this stuff falls into other hands, because if it does fall into enemy hands or terrorist hands, they're the ones who are probably going to have to do the fighting and dying to get it out of their hands, right? So they put a general officer, a one-star general, the highest ranking ODC member in all of the Defense Department right now, with a massive staff that's out there trying to make sure that end-use monitoring is happening and looking for things. In your earlier speaker who said, hey, stuff does get lost in war. That's true. There could be a Javelin missile that's in someone's basement, but that doesn't mean it's not accounted for, right? Just because it's in someone's basement does not mean it's not accounted for. It could be there because it's kept there by a special ops team and they're waiting for tanks to come through. You don't know. So we have to be very, very careful with this stuff, right? Thanks.
Sorry, guys. Yeah, sorry. Tara, I know you've been waiting a while to jump in, so go for it.
It's just stunning that we're having this conversation as if the United States and NATO countries should be involved with Ukraine at all, and that the weapons that he mentioned cost money, and they cost U.S. taxpayers money. So I'm speaking to the room as a U.S. taxpayer. Our infrastructure is falling apart. The dollar's being devalued. We're having banks collapsing. Americans are suffering and economically, and we're supporting this war in Ukraine, and there's no public consensus around it. So going back to the corruption, the original subject that Mario brought up, the corruption is with the U.S. politicians and Western politicians that are, funding this, and the Ukrainian oligarchs that are benefiting, because for sure the Ukrainian people are not the workers. These are just a few handful of elites that have benefited from that coup in 2014. And that, and so it's, yeah.
Okay, perfect. Thanks. So, because I agree as a taxpayer, I do not like wasting money. I'm 100% with you. But I will tell you that the reason that the United States is in this war, and what a lot of people don't talk about, is ever since the founding of NATO, Russia has been an existential threat of the United States. The United States
Russia's not the enemy. Lockheed Martin and Raytheon are the enemy.
Let me finish, please. I did let you speak, right? So Why does the United States bedded down anywhere from 150,000 soldiers, sailors, and airmen in Europe down to at the lowest rate 50,000 in Europe, in Germany, in Italy, in the UK? We didn't do it because we were worried about North Korea. We did it because Russia has been, for over half a century, the existential threat. They have threatened all of NATO, and we have put our forces on their land. The UK hasn't brought over and put forces in the United States. I can't wait until Russia, the paper tiger, is completely decimated, and we actually get to pull all those forces back, and we are going to save hundreds of billions of dollars by not having to bed down U.S. forces anymore in Europe, because we're paying exorbitant rates for these bases in Italy, in Germany, and other places. That has nothing to do with the defense industry, that has to do with the bloated Department of Defense. And I was part of it, so I get it, right? I want those people out of Europe. I want the Europeans to stand up. I'm sick of providing the security blanket over Europe with our 4.5% GDP when they can barely make 2. So I'm completely on board with you, but Russia needs to stop. Someone needs to poke the bully in the eye.
I think we lost Colonel.
Russia's not the enemy. Russia is
I'd
not
like
the
to ask.
enemy.
Hang on, real quick, guys.
All right, I just want to bring Ben. I want to bring Ben in. Ben, what were you gonna say?
Yeah, just a very brief question to Tara. So, regardless of your views on the Kiev regime, you said that Russia is not an enemy. Fine. Do you view them as an adversary?
No, I think that we
You don't.
have to, the military and industrial complex needs an enemy in order for it to thrive and make money. I think it's a manufactured enemy. And I think
Okay.
since 1991, when the Soviet Union collapsed, there was, and I was in DC in the early 90s, as you all know, there was talk about Russia never having a seat at the table and never becoming an economic power again. And Putin changed that. And he also called out the West and the Western hegemony in 2007. And what I saw is a lot of aggression. So I guess I have a question to all of you. Why,
Well,
if we really want out, like was just said, of all of this aggression, then why did the UK Prime Minister block peace talks? And why did our those of us that are American in the room, our American officials block any kind of diplomatic peace talks and ceasefire?
I'd like to answer that. Allow me to answer that quickly, very, very briefly. So could one not make the perhaps determination that the calculation...
Ben,
yes?
just to add to that as well, and then you can answer both.
Yeah.
Not only that, remember, Bennett from Israel also said that they were doing peace
He
talks.
did? Yes, he did. And the interview lined up, right? People were saying, well, it's mistranslated. No, the Hebrew is perfect in the English. I guess my question would be this. Could you not make an argument that the calculation being made in Washington is that, yes, Russia is indeed an adversary, and by funding this war, by propping up the Ukrainians, while they're paying with their lives, mind you, that you are, and I think everyone in the room would agree, that the Russians have taken on heavy casualties, both in manpower, but also, using up a lot of their weaponry. Basically a catastrophic blow to the Russian army. Like, could an argument not be made that that is the reason why this is continuing and they didn't want peace, right? By continuing this on, you're literally using up Russian military hardware, prestige, standing in the world, the threat of the Russian military, and all it's costing is money for one of the first conflicts the U.S. has ever been in, right? It's proxy, clearly. But could you make that argument? And you're not losing a single U.S. soldier. It's just costing money.
But
Wouldn't
Ben,
you say?
what about all the Ukrainians that are dying? What about all the Ukrainians and Russians?
Listen. At the end of the day, when one nation is promoting their own interests, whether it be hegemony or whatever, human lives usually don't come into play. I mean, I'm just being very blunt about that, right? So I think that needs to be considered. I'm not saying, look, I support one side or the other. And all this talk about Nazis, I've heard this, right? My wife was born in Ukraine. She's Jewish. She came to Israel in '91. All of her family, had the option this time around to come to Israel. And you know what? They decided to stay and fight. So, of course, there's Nazi elements in Ukraine. There's Nazi elements in the United States, in Canada.
Right. No. There's 14% of Nazi elements in 14% of the government. That's the issue. I mean, yes, you have Nazi factions, but you don't have them in making
So
parliamentary decisions and
How does
in
that work
Ukraine,
when
and
they
then of
all right,
receive less
course
than 2% of the vote? How can you
hang
have
on,
Yeah.
guys.
14% of the
Well, hold
government
on.
and
it was
not
it
One
was
second.
14%,
One
and that's
moment.
well.
All right, I'm gonna flex my muscle. Can you guys hear me? Okay. Real quick, let me get a point in here, okay? Intel, I'll get you in here, I promise, man. But your microphone, what happens is when people speak, it just blurs out the entire conversation. It's just the way your microphone's set up. Okay, so Tara, I want to address you specifically. I understand what Ben's saying, but I have two glaring problems. And number one, let me be clear on this. I don't want to be in Ukraine. I hate the military-industrial complex. I want nothing to do with any of it. But the military-industrial conflict did not invade from the east through Russia. Russia did that, and we have a problem here. We have a Budapest agreement, which Russia is now obviously screwing up because that was the deal to denuclearize Ukraine. But part of the deal was that we would come to their aid should something happen because we asked them to remove their nukes. Now, I'm not saying that they're exercising this. I think that there's other motivations at play here. And I did make the comment earlier that all peace talks from the West have been absolutely nullified. And now we've got Zelensky coming out and saying Crimea is the line. It's no longer that the Russians would leave the occupied territory that they have of Ukraine. It's now Crimea as well. So like everyone's drawing these hard lines and everyone's and they're playing all these games. Yes, the military-industrial complex. Yes, of course, I hate it. I don't like war. I don't want any war. But I understand your argument. But they didn't specifically invade Ukraine, and we do have a problem here. So now, is the argument that these were Russian separatist areas and they wanted to be part of Russia to begin with? Is the argument that NATO has been encroaching on the territory towards Russia? We just saw them sign up with Finland. They're going to push Sweden. They've already guaranteed that they're going to bring Ukraine into NATO. They've said this on multiple occasions, including an official at NATO publicly. So, like, there is an argument there by Russia to be made. They're not going to be joining NATO. They're not going to be allowed to. Right. And then we blew up their pipeline. We, the West. I can't tell you for sure. I can tell you that Seymour Hersh had some compelling reporting on it. We won't know for sure, but trying to get Seymour into the space in the future, actually. So, but again, I understand your argument, Tara, but that doesn't necessarily negate the fact that another country did in fact invade another country. And what that presents a serious amount of challenges, even for a person like me that's been called a Russian apologist.
What about the fact that there was intel, and that's already been, although it's suppressed in a lot of Western media, that there was biological weapons about to be used, and also and there was an aggression coming from Ukraine.
Well, if I could just, Tara, you mentioned 14%. I think, what was that? 14% of Nazi what? Could you finish that sentence?
Okay, if you look at the citations of the government officials involved in the Ukraine parliament, the ranges that you'll see are 7 to 14%.
So you went up to the high. You went to the immediately the highest number. But what percentage did
7 to 14% are involved with the Azov battalion and other battalions that are neo-Nazis. They're considered Nazis.
But you realize, like the Azov battalion, right? They just had delegations on a state-sponsored visit from Azov to Israel. So you have to be very careful saying that all Azov are not.
Of course, you know what?
Okay,
they talk about Stephen Bandera. Who is Stephen Bandera? You know your
there
history,
are good
right?
Nazis. Okay, we live in a world where there are good Nazis, and you will salute Hitler because it's a liberal thing to do.
I think I just jumped off on a call, came back. We're back to the Nazi discussion, which I wanted to skip.
Yeah,
I wanted not to go back to that one.
I didn't either.
See what happens when you go on a call, Mario?
No, but Mario, let me get you up to date here real quick. So I'm having an issue, kind of resoluting Tara's position on this because the arguments that she's making are accurate as far as military-industrial complex, as far as Western aggression, not wanting to do peace talks. All of that's true, right? But Russia did cross the border, right? So they did push into Ukraine. We do have the Budapest Agreement from 1994, which denuclearized Ukraine. Like, I understand that Russia's breaking that now, but we aren't. I'm not saying that I want to support any kind of anything going on in Ukraine. I want no part of it. But we have to make sound arguments if that's the argument that's going to be, and want to make sure that I can actually reconcile it. And then the Nazis came up, Mario. So that's what happened.
Yeah, no, I like the point you made. This is one I've made many times, and actually I'm interested on Slayman's take on this before going to all sorts. Slayman, this is the argument I make is that there's a lot of things that shouldn't have happened. There's a lot of things that escalated matters. Obviously, NATO's expansion is one. Some things happening in 2014 in the war there is number two. I don't want to go down the Nazi debate again.
Hey
But
guys, a bit of
does
an
that?
urgent thing, Mario. Mario, just a
What is it?
tiny
What's
urgent
up?
thing. So take a look at the top there. If you could actively retweet that, that'd be great because Nick has been unfairly or rather mistakenly locked out of his Twitter account for reporting on the Louisville shooting. So you want to boost that, right? I mean,
Oh,
yeah.
he mentioned to me. I just
Okay,
got a message from him.
I
I'm in
documented
Twitter.
it. So if
Yeah, oh, good.
everybody in
Thanks,
the
man. Yeah.
retweet it, that'd be great. Retweet it, like it, retweet it, and get Elon and Ella to take notice.
But
of
isn't
that.
it usually just isn't it just temporary?
Yeah, it's 12 hours.
No. This is requiring that he delete the tweets, and it's not telling him why he should be doing it. Just that he has somehow violated a rule that is
Okay,
not being
but can't
specified.
he?
Ian, why are you telling us, bro? I thought Elon was your boy. Why didn't you just message him?
It's a massive.
Because I want Ella to deal with this, and I don't have a direct contact with her, and this is kind of her job. So, yeah.
That's massive.
Yeah.
I was
So,
just joking. I was just
but
joking.
hold on, just one clear thing. If he deletes that tweet, isn't it all good then? He's good to go.
We don't know, and it's warning him that if he is
He shouldn't
repeatedly
have to delete it.
violating
Is
the
the
rules,
point?
he'll be suspended for good. So that doesn't make any
Bro,
sense,
let's just,
right?
but Simon, that's just, yeah, but for me, like, okay, let's just say it's an algorithmic mistake. I'm like, bro, okay, cool.
So,
Like,
so
Nah,
Mario,
it's not
I can
cool,
I
bro.
can
It's
tell you
not
why
cool.
it's happened.
You need to sort it out.
Because
yeah, go. What does it happen?
I can tell you why this happened because as somebody who posts very violent content, I can tell you why. The specific reason is because it's the shooter, and it's promoting basically the shooter's narrative and kind of like quote unquote glorifying it. My recommendation is when you have a situation, do not ever get. That is the quickest way you're going to get banned. Do not get near anybody's manifesto or anything about mass shooters. Just don't. I would recommend to Nick just eliminate it and find out a different way you can talk about it without actually sharing the specifically. That link has been blacklisted. Anybody who shares it is going to get an automatic ban by the algorithms. Just delete it and find another way you can talk about it.
So I'm just looking exclusive. I'm just looking exclusive. The scene of the Louisville shooting, a scene from the front of the entrance of the old National Building. Then they puts the building's landlord assaulting Nick, which is probably telling him not to stop filming. So I'm watching the video now. And then, so he's not showing manifesto. He's not talking about it. He's just literally attacking journalists on an open sidewalk is a crime, sir. So he's just, and then the guy just came and kind of stopped his camera. So I just don't see, I don't see much there.
Look at the top, Mario. Look at the nest.
Yeah, guys.
Look at the nest. That specific tweet, that link, I'm telling you right now, has been the link he shared that got it banned was the Instagram account of the shooter.
Yes,
That
like
link
Doc.
is blacklisted by Twitter. The moment any shooting happens, they blacklist it. Anybody who shares it will automatically get suspended.
Makes sense. Okay, cool. Let's
Okay,
go to the question I had.
Yeah, I want to answer that.
What's my point? I didn't. Oh, okay, yeah. I did make the point very briefly. Yeah, it's like there's a lot of misinterpreted, but is that an excuse for invading a country?
No, I don't agree because look, that's taking the reality.
I've seen all your tweets and messages, your posts on Instagram saying like 2 years ago saying Russia should invade Ukraine. Ukraine belongs to. I've seen your tweets, bro.
Nah, bro.
I'm joking, everyone. I'm joking.
You're trying to get me banned.
Let's before.
You're confusing our Twitter accounts,
I've got
Mario.
2 degrees of separation. Ian will get me unbanned anyway. His boy will get me unbanned, so no stress. But anyway, what I was saying was the reason why I don't agree is because you're basically taking the situation from isolated point of view. But let's look at it from a world politics point of view. From a world politics point of view, when you have a scenario where your neighboring country is getting armed by somebody who is essentially your enemy or someone you consider your enemy, that is a huge problem and you can't allow that. Let's just give an example. We know well known, and this is without me even looking into the history book, something I learned as a child. Nicaragua, if I'm not pronouncing it wrong, but basically, why did the US have huge problems with that? Why did the US have huge problems with Cuba? There's reasons for that, because when you have basically a force that is being weaponized on your border.
Yeah, true. Did the US invade those 2 countries and annex any territory?
So Nicaragua, I can't remember. I'm pretty sure they did, but I could be wrong on that. It's just I studied it when I was a child. But what I know is they did have severe conflict with them. So the point being that whenever someone's in your border and you're weaponizing them and you're supporting them, and that's what was happening. So the whole point was this: Putin had an agreement off the books. It's very clear with the presidents of the United States, or with NATO, if you want to call it, but we know it's basically the US. That look, don't supply weapons. don't include them in NATO, and it was just an
But then
agreement that was
wouldn't be
known.
I don't know. I just don't think that's a reason to invade. And again, that's an
Of course it
explanation of
is,
why they
because
did it. Of
because
course
what would
it
happen?
is. You don't invade the
So what would happen?
territory, man.
So
An
if you create,
ex-territory.
bro.
If I
So
may.
it'd be dumb from a political point of view, from a geopolitical point of view. It'd be really dumb if you allowed Ukraine to have weapons to
No,
become
I
part
didn't
of
say
NATO.
You see,
Then
I didn't say
then they would
allow it,
have nuclear.
Slyman. Allow it. Don't allow it. But there's other ways of dealing with it.
But hold on, Mario. I think, but let me
What
actually
is the
do
other way,
something.
Mario? Mario, what is the
This
other
is
way?
going to shock you. I
Yeah,
agree with
shock us
Suleiman.
also.
I agree with
Okay,
him in the sense
okay.
that
Get to the point.
if
What do you
you
agree
look
with?
at Russia's point of view, they viewed, first of all, an independent Ukraine to them notionally is just unacceptable, right? Just
Hold
the
on.
bare
What do you mean?
notion
What
of
do you mean? Independent? No. An
like
independent
a
Ukraine. I wouldn't say it's
sovereign.
He means
Hold on, I'll
unacceptable.
Western
explain it.
control. He
Hold on,
means
let
U.S.
me go.
Mario,
control.
don't
Mario.
interrupt. All sources
Hold
agreeing
on.
with me. It means he's going to be right.
Hold on. Yes, exactly.
Too quiet,
This is
guys.
the issue, but this is where his argument falls. This is the problem with that argument. In this way, listen, Russia does not want a strong, independent Ukraine. And they don't. It's a core issue. If you look at the purpose of like Russian identity, it's always been Ukraine plays a major role in Russian identity. There is a reason why, since Ukrainian independence, Russia has been very active in its internal politics and influenced its internal politics from 2005, even prior to that, since its independence, but 2005, 2014, etc. Right. So clearly, Russia, what they saw, because of the failure of Crimea, that in the sense that the annexation of Crimea and then what we saw in the Donetsk and Luhansk Oblast, what Russia wanted to do through the Minsk Accord was to push those provinces, that because they didn't recognize their independence, to push those provinces to Ukraine to be part of Ukrainian territory, but that those two provinces had a veto over Ukrainian foreign policy and military policy. That way, Russia does not have to manage Ukraine, but here's our fail-safe message to ensure that Ukraine does not become part of NATO. Okay, that all failed. Putin said, that's it. I'm going to invade. So Suman's right? I mean, that's Russia's geopolitical interest. Like, I'm not arguing if it's right or wrong. We're just analyzing it purely from a purely military
And
point of view, right?
also, just from a military point of view as well, like there's a reason why United States are also invested in Ukraine. The reason why they
Right.
basically undercover didn't agree to broke the
And
Minsk
this is
agreement.
the problem.
They did the
though.
coup. So my question to you also is, they did the coup, they did all these things. Why is it, like from a military point of view, why is it that basically US is so invested in that country?
So let me answer that. I'm not going to get to the coup because you're not. We don't agree there. We're in agreement. Let's go to the positive.
But you have to admit that the economic investments by BlackRock and other companies that are buying up the land in Ukraine, and Ukraine is very resource rich.
Tara, hold on. Let me get to this point. This is where, because I know this is an argument that me and Patrick Fox, the other Patrick that we've had, we agree. So what happens? Russia invades Ukraine. So now you get the Baltics, you get Poland, and you get even Finland and Sweden be like, oh shit, Russia just invaded Ukraine. Holy shit, we need to apply for NATO because we need to be protected. The U.S. says, okay, wait a minute. I now have and this is what I can't remember what was the speaker. I think it was the Colonel Joe. I think he said it. Like, okay, we have now a once in a lifetime opportunity. And by the way, let's make something abundantly clear. The Ukrainians want to fight. This isn't like, now can they fight or not? We're not going to get. The Ukrainians want to fight. So the West collectively, and the U.S. specifically, says, wow, I am seeing Russia's military being absolutely decimated from a conventional military threat. And if all I need to do is send them a couple $1 billion, let's say even 100, let's just say what all that, the numbers you say, you know what's more expensive? Because of the tensions, if Russia would have succeeded and seized Ukraine and made Ukraine basically a Belarus and had Russian troops permanently in Ukraine, there is a very fair chance you could have run into a situation of a conflict between the border regions, between Poland, Ukraine, between Russia, whatever, that now requires an Article 5. Because the Baltic states would have been paranoid. They would have been fearful of the existence of their state way more than Russia with Ukraine. So the U.S., from a purely national security point of view, let's just get away from the moral argument. Purely national security is like, both the U.S. and Russia, let's just be real, guys. Both the U.S. and Russia view each other as geopolitical threats. We're not holding hands saying, kumbaya, we're best friends. No, that's dead. That's been dead since the mid-2000s. The U.S. and Russia will never agree. They're not. So the question is, who's going to come on top? And how are we going to make sure who comes on top? The Russians support groups and countries that do not support the U.S. The U.S. then is going to be like, we're going to follow the same model. And if Ukrainians are willing to fight and they're going to decimate the Russian military to make them as weak as possible, that is in our national security interest because it's more expensive to deploy troops. Because, Tara, to your point, what's actually the most expensive thing in our budget is personnel, the healthcare, and the maintenance of equipment done by the military, not contractors, by the military.
That's
That's the
literally
most
what I just
expensive.
said.
Also, just coming back to the point, and for the moment that you agreed with me, they just need to announce the newsletter. So, in commemoration of that, there is the newsletter. It's tagged above. So, if anybody wants to read it, just click on it.
You better put that in the newsletter.
Yeah,
yeah, for sure.
But
that's not how you shout it out. So the newsletter's pinned above everyone. We summarize spaces, we notify you of other spaces, and we notify you of important news unrelated to All Source and Slayman in that newsletter. I've just pinned it above and retweeted it on my account. Make sure you subscribe there. That's how you pitch Slayman. That's how you do it, my friend.
We have a vote. Which was the better pitch? Mario's boring. Guys, click the newsletter on mine and All Sources. Very linked, related banter style.
Mario's.
Bro,
he wants 8 subscribers.
But no one's addressing the fact that there were biological labs in Ukraine, and that's been proven and admitted by Victoria Nuland.
They were funded by the
are we going in order
funded by
Israel?
So
funded by
that
Hunter
threat
Biden. I mean,
was
it's
right on
very
a Russian
interesting, and
border.
So Slayman, you're responding to All Source's point before going to Mickey and Zeke?
Yeah. I mean, basically, it was. I think we kind of agreed, but the whole point was that my issue is this, and it was just to answer your question. That look, Russia, and as also said, they do see them as enemies, and I agree with you. I don't agree with this argument that they don't, that like the people they consider as friends. And so when your enemy is essentially having significant interest on your border, that's a huge problem. And so that's the reason. So when you say that why Russia went in, they were forced to, because what else could they have done? The other option would have been to essentially become the battering rams of the world, just like Germany are, and take a beating and just deal with it. And all that would have happened was the destruction of the society. So they had no choice. They were back in the corner. Like the bully who punches you like all the time. And you're gonna have to do something about it. That's literally what happened.
So, what do you do about it? Yeah, go to Captain. Go to Captain Zeke and Mickey. Go ahead, Captain.
So I want to talk about the idea of the referendums. I live on the border of Quebec, which, if you're not familiar, is the province of Canada that has twice held provincial referendums about whether to succeed from Canada. One in 1980, one in 1995. One I remember, one I don't. And some very, very clear law has come out of this experience. Recently, Lord Reid, the president of the Supreme Court of the United Kingdom, followed the law precisely in assessing under what conditions Scotland could separate from the United Kingdom. So when we interrogate, these small regional referendums in Ukraine, and when we understand that Canadian election observers, particularly led by former Prime Minister John Turner, regularly went to Ukraine to supervise elections, for instance, in the Orange Revolution, that we go to referendums in places like Sudan, a country that divided itself in half using this process, the West is willing to let Quebec and Scotland go under a process that it is described, which is unambiguously fair, which is just ask a clear question and gain a clear majority. And when it happens, the world sends observers to watch these things take place. So I listen to these debates like this, like, oh, but this was at a barrel gun, or this was at a barrel gun, or you don't like the result, so it was a barrel gun. No one in the world believes that the process, which we have all agreed to, that we're willing to cut off the top of the United Kingdom observing, was observed. The only people who support the results of these referendums are the Russians. And if we in the West saw this process being observed, we would be honor bound to follow along. But we weren't invited. For some reason, it's the one election in Ukraine in the last 20 years that no one's observed. And it sucks.
Actually, that's not true. There was international reporters. I talked to one.
Yeah, international reporters.
Who was there.
I'm not talking about reporters, honey. I'm talking about John Turner. John Turner is a former prime minister who led a formal UN delegation, which is the standard process of election observers. Lay reporters writing stories about whether they feel in their heart of hearts that the referendum makes them feel warm and
But
fuzzy
the
on the
UN is
inside.
openly
Madam, with
hostile to
respect, I
Russia.
didn't
The
interrupt.
UN.
Oh God.
I just didn't. So I waited 25 minutes to speak. You can pay me the same respect. Thanks. So if we're willing to break up our own countries using this process, I'm sure we would have let Donetsk go. And we can really paint the idea that we should give any merit or any credence whatsoever to these so-called referendums.
So, Captain, you know what I think the flaw in your argument is you finish with saying, I'm sure we would have let them go. But we know from the history of Ukraine that it wasn't as simple as I'm sure we would have let them go. NATO had a significant interest in ensuring that Ukraine was the way it was. They overthrew the government. That's well known. It's widely reported that the Minsk agreement wasn't done with honorably. I think if I remember right, it was Chirac and Merkel, but I could be getting the ministers wrong, who literally said that we did it in bad faith. So essentially, it isn't the case that it was
Even
something
Zelensky
that we
admitted
would
it.
allow
So let's
fairly.
take your reason.
Yeah.
Let's imagine you're correct. And so if you're correct,
No, I don't have to imagine I'm correct. I mean, he is correct. Suleiman is correct. We don't have to imagine it. He is
Suleiman is
correct.
correct, we're willing to let Scotland go. We're not in love with Scotland. Scotland can go. We're willing to let Quebec go. So long, Quebec. See ya. But we're in love with Donetsk so much that we're willing to throw aside our regime of succession laws to keep that in the Union. That makes no sense whatsoever.
That's a weak argument. Because tell me when the United States or NATO tried to overthrow the British government. It didn't happen, but they did overthrow the Ukrainian government. Tell me an example where they basically allowed the enemies to be they weaponized Ukraine while saying that they entered the agreement in bad faith. That didn't happen in the United Kingdom. So these arguments are not good comparisons, because essentially it was a different psychology of what was happening in Ukraine, and essentially what it was to make sure that Ukraine was used as a tool against Russia. Vaughn, go for it.
Yeah, Captain, I have a question for you, one Canadian to another. Do you remember what our Prime Minister, Stephen Harper, said about the Crimean referendum before it happened?
No,
he said, we will not recognize the result of it. It's not that our observers weren't invited. We didn't go. We didn't send any. One. Two, to argue that would be honor bound is, to frame it nicely, a bit naive, because national interest and strategic interest trumps all of this. And we've seen it a billion times. We will never acknowledge a referendum that is to the benefit of a geopolitical rival. We will do it for the ones that are in our interest, or don't tilt the scale geopolitically. But it's naive, dude, and your other statement is factually incorrect.
Captain,
but I mean, Vaughn,
from
if
the
I
Globe
may,
and Mail saying John Baird, who was Stephen Harper's foreign minister, dismissing the results of the election. So I'm not sure that we're looking at the same thing whatsoever. But the idea that we don't have strategic ties to Scotland or Quebec is crazy.
Liam, let's go into private practice.
I didn't say that. I didn't say we don't have strategic ties. Don't put words into my mouth. But how does Quebec seceding, given the whole talk that it would remain a member of NAFTA and all that, have any give an advantage to our geopolitical rivals?
Well, so that completely ignores.
If you're going to counteract what I'm saying, counteract what I'm saying.
Quebec has never popularly supported the idea of going to any of Canada's wars ever. It has been taken along because it's part of a minority. During the Second World War, when there was a national referendum on the idea of conscription, Quebecers voted overwhelmingly not to go. Quebecers overwhelmingly did not wish to go to the First World War, and the Afghan War was much, much less popular in Quebec than it was anywhere else in the country. And a large contingent of Canada's military, which makes up part of NATO, it comes from Quebec. So strategically, you would hamstring an allied military and end up with a country, Quebec, that would overwhelmingly, much like, Ireland, not wish to participate in foreign wars. That would be the strategic outcome.
But Vaughn,
Except it's also
If I
It's
may just
also
put
been established
But
that
I
Quebec
know
would
you're going to
Yeah,
answer, but I really want to.
just let Von go and then also because Von's
I
gonna
do
speak.
want to ask him a question though, because I know he's
go
going to
ahead.
answer. I really want to answer
Question.
his question if he can address it. Is that because you're saying the Crimea, right, the referendum? But I mean, I think it's important to highlight that the reason why the West has said we're not going to acknowledge the Crimea referendum is because Russian Spetsnaz forces seized Crimea, and then there was a referendum. Like we can't ignore the use of military force to seize Crimea before the referendum was done. I mean, they seized it and then there was a referendum. So I think that's kind of also has to be highlighted why the West said, no, we're not acknowledging this. You used military force, but I'll let you respond.
I'm not speaking one way or another to the validity of the referendum. That's a discussion for a separate space where I'm concerned anyway. What I am speaking to is the argument that we send observers and we're honor bound. We decided beforehand that the results will not be recognized, so we didn't send observers. My what I said was to a specific point, was in response to a specific point and within a specific scope. I know that's not a satisfactory answer, but as I said, for me, this is a different subject for a different discussion.
Zeke, jump in. Oh, sorry, Mickey. It was Mickey first. Mickey.
Yep. I just a couple of things. I think just generally when trying to, in my opinion, when trying to ratify, figure out what happened, it's better to go as close as possible to the source, right? So, and what happened, if you want to know what happened during Hurricane Katrina, you want to be talking to people who were there in New Orleans. And similarly, like having worked and lived in Ukraine for 6.5 years, I can tell you that general consensus with everyone I would know, which is from everyone from people from the gym to people from work to people doing business, is that it's not generally believed that the United States caused Euromaidan. It's very firmly believed by the Ukrainian people, at least the ones I know, that it was the impetus behind the protests were promises broken by Viktor Yanukovych and uncovered rampant corruption at the time. And I also want to point out just another perspective on this NATO thing. I think Suleiman and all sorts had this. I hate to break up the agreement that you guys had, but just to give another perspective, like I think saying that it is, of course, the Russian perspective that that the encroachment of NATO is causing them to militarize and attack its neighbors. But I sort of feel like it's like this causation correlation issue, right? If you see a lot of people with umbrellas, you wouldn't say that umbrellas cause the rain. Like the reason why the Russians' neighbors want to join NATO is because Russia keeps invading its neighbors. So there is this sort of like spiral that's caused by continuously invading your neighbors over time, not just in the last few decades, but historically as well. And again, like going as close to the problem as you can as possible. It's sort of like how in the United States, the people who are most pro-communist are like college students with posters of Che in their bedrooms, but the people who came from Cuba are the most fervently anti-communist. It's the same in Europe and in Eastern Europe, right? The closer you are to the orbit of Russia, the closer you are to being a former Soviet Union state, the more likely you are to be fearful of Russia, the more likely you are to support the military action in Ukraine. And the further you are from the conflict, those are the people who tend to support Russia's military action in Ukraine. And I think to me, you always want to get as close to the place as possible and start talking to the people. And if anyone wants to come with me to Ukraine, I'm happy to take you. We can talk to people in the street. You can talk to people in bars and restaurants. You can talk to business people, and I think you'd have a very different perspective.
I mean, Mickey,
That's an excellent
I agree
point.
Mickey, I actually agree with that point. I mean, I traveled throughout Bulgaria and talked to the people, and they have a lot of PTSD about the USSR rule at the time. They even tell me stories about how they had to hide their religious text because it was completely destroyed. So I don't disagree with that, but that's in my view a separate point, but not a separate point because then it means I'm diminishing it. But what I mean is I agree with that, but that still doesn't take away the major factor that was the case, that you basically, your enemy on your border is going to be armed. They're going to be armed by your enemy. They're also thinking about joining NATO. You have an understanding and an agreement, if you agree with the Gorbachev reporting, that they're not going to join NATO. And you kind of have assurances from Trump, so that's not going to happen. And then as soon as Trump leaves, those assurances are dead. And then you have the weaponization. Like, I can understand why he made the move he did, because if he didn't, the fear was that it would have been the end of his country. But anyway, that's my thought. Zeke, what do you think?
Well, okay.
Yeah, so I mean, to your point, Suleiman, there were tons of Western foreign policy experts and U.S. military experts who laid out all these red lines that would lead to Russia invading Ukraine. And so, we can talk about the statements and the posturing about Ukraine joining NATO that were ramped up starting in 2008. We can talk about the regime change operation in 2014, which I'm sorry, Mickey. I mean, there's just too much evidence and, even direct statements from senators and State Department officials and intelligence officials about the United States involvement with that operation. And after that, we had the sending of weapons to Ukraine, the training of Ukrainian troops at CIA facilities, and the list goes on, right? And so, also, I think to your point, when you said that Russia was fearful of an independent Ukraine, I think you might have meant that they were fearful of a State Department installed government handpicked by Victoria Nuland and the subsequent corrupt U.S. interests that were installed on Russia's border. And so speaking of that, to Tara's point, these biological weapons facilities that were funded by the Defense Department and the CIA are one of the things that Russia has pointed to almost more than anything else in terms of provocations. And so we can dismiss it as Russian propaganda, but the problem with that is the very well-documented defense contracts to companies like Metabiota, who the Biden family was directly invested in, as people on the panel may be aware of. So, there were a lot of provocations behind this invasion. And Mickey, the people in Eastern Ukraine very much wanted to be independent of Ukraine after 2014. I think, it's difficult to ignore the firsthand accounts. If you go back and look at, say, BBC documentaries from the time of what those people were saying, and what they wanted in terms of, their own sovereignty or their own sort of ties to Russia, as they were, historically very Russian speaking, and, their culture is very much Russian.
Yeah, I think.
Well, and
I think I'm curious. I have some questions, but I think there's some truth to that. I think that that really consensus and the opinion on Russia and Ukraine has changed so much since the invasion. I mean, most Ukrainians would go to Moscow, would had friends and family in Russia. I mean, it's so even remarkable the changes happened even in Eastern Ukraine since the invasion. I think that has changed and swayed Ukrainian opinion greatly. I think that Russia's decision has completely alienated what would previously be people who are more open to working with Russia, economically, or felt tied to the region. And that I've seen that shift greatly. I do have a question, Zeke, because purely from ignorance, I don't know much about the biolabs. Like, to me, a biological lab could be like something in a high school, like an American high school. Like what?
Yeah,
and I don't know
but
about it, so I'm just
the
asking what those are.
the Defense Department usually doesn't fund high school biological facilities, right? And so we're talking about biological facilities that were installed, very close to Russia's border in Eastern Ukraine. And these companies, you can go to the BidenLaptopReport.com and you can just type in Metabiota, and you can see that, Hunter Biden, when he invested in Metabiota back in 2014, within a month, they were getting a $30 million defense contract. And so, there's sort of direct ties there, but this is not the only, biological facility or the only company that was running biolabs in Ukraine. There were about 40 of them in the country after 2014. I think they started the program back in 2005, but obviously after 2014, as the U.S. gained a lot of influence over decisions in Ukraine, we really ramped up those programs with companies like Metabiota.
No, wait.
Oh, go ahead, Josh. Go ahead.
Thank you. So Zeke, you know as well as I do that if there's anybody on this panel besides you, that I definitely know this stuff, right? You and I have gone deep into this, and we're looking into other things, concurrently together. Like I'm well aware of this. But when I start to put all of this together, I've had a little bit of a different thought, and this is something that I've been talking about for a very long time. So I think. I know, at this point, based on the documents and reporting and things that have been done, that there were biolabs, right? We had MSO4 labs in there. We know that there was not just a high school lab. Like, these were serious labs and a serious concern there. I also think that the encroachment of NATO countries is an aggressive move towards a non-NATO country. I think that that's something to be considered. I think that the biolabs are convenient for him to bring up and frankly, I don't want them to exist at all in that country. But again, I think it's convenient for them to bring up. When I look at the map of occupied territory, right, we can talk about the rhetoric of I'm going to and honestly, I'm going to expand on this a little bit, because I was in southeastern Poland just last September, and I was talking with my friends. I was in Katowice, which is south, just a little bit west of Krakow, but it's not far, and it's not far from Ukraine. And by the way, I love Poland. Absolutely great country. And have a lot of friends there. And a lot of my friends are actually directly connected to the refugee program that they have throughout Europe. And I have comments about that. But when I talk to them and when I see what's going on, and I know about the biolabs, and I know about what Putin is saying about Russia invasion, so on and so forth, but I look at the occupied territories, and I understand Donbass region, and I understand why they would have those regions to begin with. I still always land on part one was Crimea, warm water port. Part two was natural bridge. So I think that Putin is simply bringing up the fact that, hey, by the way, there's some real sketchy biolabs in the Ukraine. We saw that Zelensky put out a cable to basically destroy all the communications 2 days before Russia invaded. Destroy all the medical records, destroy all the records and related to these labs and all the other things. I have the cable. I have it. So we saw that happen, right? And we saw, but ultimately, I think you can use NATO. I think that's a guiding force. I think you can use biolabs. I think that's a guiding force. I think that you could even use the argument that these people wanted to separate from Ukraine, be independent, and join back with Russia. But I think at the end of the day, strategically, you have a warm water port in Crimea and you need a natural bridge. I think that's all this was. And this rhetoric and this talk about Russia is going to go all the way through Europe and drop a Russian flag on the Eiffel Tower is just absolute nonsense. I haven't seen any movement beyond taking in these regions. So I think Russia.
Trash. Let me answer to that.
Yep.
Please.
Yep.
So first, Zeke, I think Mickey brought up a good point. Right? Because there was an agreement post 2014, a lot of Eastern Europe, Eastern Ukraine wanted to kind of have this independence-ish from Ukraine. They were concerned. The problem is Russia overestimated that, thinking that equates to me wanting to be part of Russia. Right? That's the problem. A perfect example, Kharkiv. Kharkiv was, everybody thought, if one of the major cities that might have outside of the Donbass, besides Kramatorsk and the cities there in the Donbass that have fought for years, there was an assumption that Kharkiv was going to be one of them. When Russia invaded Ukraine, they got absolutely demolished in Kharkiv. And one of the main reasons they got absolutely demolished was twofold. One, they stood up territorial defense forces, volunteers, normal Ukrainian civilians, massive recruitments to fight the Russians. Because this is Ukraine, this isn't Russia, get the hell out. It's not that crazy to imagine. And then two, Western's equipment to them, specifically small arms and designed for like the small unit tactics insurgencies, Javelin, Stingers, and the Russians had no response to that. So that's the thing, right? And then, Trash, to your point, no, they always wanted the land bridge. No, they wanted Kyiv, guys. They wanted Kyiv. They wanted to put a guy in Kyiv in charge of all of Ukraine. And how much of Ukraine was going to be under their control would have been up to the Russians, depending on the level of victory. If Russia had an absolute victory and they said, we want everything east of the Dnieper River, nobody was going to stop them. You don't launch your main effort to Kyiv in the hope of seizing some small areas in the Donetsk. Like before the Russian invasion occurred, one of the arguments was there was basically three courses of actions that we kind of debated of Russia if they were going to invade, which most people who were following Russian narrative was like, they're not going to invade. But there was three. It was going to be the Donetsk and Luhansk to completely conquer those oblasts. The second one was the land bridge. And then the third one is an absolute invasion. Kyiv, seize Kyiv, kill Zelensky, kill the leadership of Ukraine, and put somebody else in charge. Or hope that significant elements of the Ukrainian leadership flees to Lviv and they're just that part of Western Ukraine that nobody gives a shit about. Right? Russia's main effort of this invasion for the first 2 to 3 months was Kyiv. Period.
Yeah, I mean, all sorts. I don't disagree with you, but like I also think if they had just taken Kyiv, like it would have saved a lot of lives, and the result is not going to be all that different in the end. Like I think Russia is going to end up with eastern Ukraine. You know, they're not going to go all the way to Kharkiv. It's going to be, you know, separated sort of by the Dnipro, right? That's going to be the ultimate outcome. But, you know, in
You really think Russia's going to seize
strategically,
the eastern part of Ukraine?
the eastern parts that they're already holding. Like, I think this is largely where the lines are ultimately going to be drawn. But I think from their perspective, they were probably testing the resistance on the way to Kyiv, and they probably would have taken it if they could have. But I sort of agree
I'm
with
sorry.
you.
Look,
Sort of
here's
agree
the reason why I disagree with you.
I agree.
Here's the reason why I disagree with you. And I'm going to show it to you in the military sense of the ground, right? Russia's budget. The reason why you can look and say why Russia's objective was Kyiv, nothing but Kyiv. Look at their invasion plan. Go back in time. Hold on. Go back in time. Look at the ways that Russia was investing. There was two key reasons why you can say it was Kyiv. It was the Battle of Sumy and the Battle of Cherniv. Sumy is like 80 kilometers from the Russian border. Like 80 kilometers. It's right there. The Russians attempted to seize it. They failed. And they're like, you know what? That's not our objective. Our objective is Kyiv. Isolate Sumy. And that's when you got not the 40. The 40 kilometer was from like Chernobyl, Cherniv down. But what you would see is these Russian rushes, just mad rushes to Kyiv. Absolute daring rushes to Kyiv, because what they wanted to do was encircle Kyiv and then enable the forces from Hostomel in the northwest to push down. Guys, like...
Correct. They wanted to make it quick. Like, I think we're in agreement.
Yeah, and they got slaughtered. The Ukrainians didn't want to fall.
And so they shifted to the next objective, which is exactly what Trash was talking about in terms of like the hierarchy of strategical objectives. If they're not going to be able to take Kyiv quickly, they want to secure the land bridge. They want to, you know, ensure that Crimea is ultimately Russian, and they want to liberate the parts of eastern Ukraine that have been getting shelled for 9 years.
In a negotiation, like when they were saying Kharkiv, significant portions of the Kharkiv Oblast would have been still under Russian control. Significant portions of the Kherson capital, the only...
We don't know what those it didn't have to be status quo. The negotiations could have been, you guys leave Kharkiv, you know, you go back to the LPR, DPR, and you can have Crimea. We didn't have
Russia
to,
never would have agreed with
everything that they had at the time.
Russia does not agree with that. Come on, Zeke, you and I both see...
They don't agree with what? They don't agree with what, all source?
That Russia does not want... What is Russia's demands right now? It's absolute.
Russia
we don't know because we won't officially even come to the table.
Look at Russia's... Look at Medvedev. Look at Putin's statements. It's clear as day that Russia wants the same demands that they had. Zelensky gets removed from power, a neutral Ukraine, a pro-Russian government,
and on our
or a
side,
way
we're
to
calling
influence.
for Putin to be removed from power. Zelensky's calling for Putin to be removed.
Yeah,
from power.
but I wonder why Zelensky wants Putin removed from power. I mean, let's not equate.
Why does the U.S. want Putin removed from
Zelensky
power?
has challenged Putin to a duel, to fight him in a duel to the death.
All I'm saying is, why do you think, again, but this goes to the argument against the West dictates that there's no negotiations. You guys are, but this is Ukrainians dictating what Ukrainians want, right? This idea that Boris Johnson, by the way, who got it removed as prime minister months ago, still has a sway in Ukrainian domestic politics, and the way that Zelensky and the Ukrainian
went
people
there, and that's well documented. He went there in April. It's well documented. He went there. Even mainstream media talked about it. Even he talked about it openly.
Tara, you're forgetting about Bucha. I can't reverse this enough. Bucha changed everything. Guys, you got to listen to... I listened
the thing was staged. It was a good job. Great timing.
Okay. You guys, I listen to both the Russian side and the Ukrainian side. I understand the Russian narrative. Like, people want to blame me about being an establishment. That's fine. Like, yes, I take from establishment. But I watch Russian news sources.
Snake Island was a turning point for me, all source.
I take Russian sources. I watch Russian sources consistently. But I also
got it from Ukrainian sources, actually, when the boats
I watch Ukraine. And what do Ukrainians say?
And who are the Ukrainians say? Let's look at them. You know, the Boatman boys are a group of terrorists. Yeah, a group of Russian terrorists who are wanted in Russia for crimes. You know, they committed terrorist attacks against Muslims. Right? They were basically they fled the country, and they got some nice cushy gigs in Ukraine, where they led some of the nastiest fucking militias in the country. And they were the ones first on the scene in Bucha, right? Taking photos, taking videos, and you know, what a wonderful coincidence. It's one of the worst fucking Russian or formerly Russian groups
makes its way into Bucha, where some of the worst humanitarian disasters in the war has happened. Yeah, they're the ones on the scene, taking photos, taking videos, smiling. Yeah, okay, yeah. Totally, totally not there at all. Didn't do it themselves, to make Russia look bad. Totally. Great coincidence.
There's no shortage of humanitarian disasters in Ukraine, not Bucha notwithstanding. I think the key is, I think also is making a good point, which is just to look at what are like the Russians themselves admitting to. What are they saying, right? The policy of Russia is, and you can see it. Many officials from the Kremlin have said that without Ukraine, Russia is not an empire. They say that Ukrainians don't have a right to exist. Ukraine doesn't have a right to exist, and they are seeking complete control of Ukraine. So, like again, like. It's really interesting. We're like going back to this.
So what is the American interest in all of this?
So Mickey, I don't agree with. I don't. One second.
Why are we sinking? Yeah.
Mickey,
why are we?
Mickey, I don't agree that they want the whole of Ukraine. Like I know this is the talking points of what the US is, and I'm not saying you're doing that, but essentially, that's I understand that's the argument. It's to cause fear. It's to basically get people engaged and wanting to be part of the war. In reality, the issue was very simple. That this war was caused for these reasons, propagated by the military industrial complex. And when there was an opportunity for some form of agreement and treaty, unfortunately, my country, United Kingdom, ensured that it didn't happen. And then we had the Israeli prime minister who literally said that an agreement was in place. And again, that was broken down on purpose to ensure there wasn't peace. So whenever, from my perspective, like I'm not pro-Russia, and I'm glad you actually brought up the point about Bulgaria because I give that example. But my thing is, I'm pro-peace, and I don't want any lives lost. And I feel like too many people are benefiting from this war continuing financially, and so therefore it's in their interest to continue the war while people's lives are getting lost. That's the issue.
But I think the issue is it's not necessarily the territorial control. It's not. I think this is where this is the problem.
Those guys.
This
if I come off as pro-Russia or whatever, I'm just a pragmatist. I don't like seeing people die.
So just to respond to your point, Suleiman, I understand that perspective, and like I was saying before, if you want to know, what happened in Hurricane Katrina, you want to go talk to people who were in New Orleans at the time of Hurricane Katrina. If you want to know what's happening in Ukraine, you should talk to Ukrainians. And I think 7 years there.
I'm going to interrupt you there.
I can tell you.
You keep saying that Ukrainians want that, but I've talked to a lot of Ukrainians as well, and I've also have, as far
as. How many
years
did you spend living in Ukraine, Sarah?
I haven't lived in Ukraine.
Okay. Well, I was there.
I'm talking about.
And let me finish my point, and I'll let you share your experience in Ukraine. But
so I know a number of Ukrainians who would actually agree with what Tara is saying. I mean, like, what's your point here?
Well,
you can have different perspectives.
I tell you, Ian, you and I will. You and I, we can
live in the Donbass.
With.
I know people who have been affected from this directly.
Ian,
right? For
Ian, you and I can do this. Ian, let's do this. You and I do this. I'll go with trash. We'll go to Poland. I'll get in a car. We'll drive to Ukraine, and we'll talk to as many people as you want for 2 weeks, and we'll share our perspective on the space. How about that?
I'm down.
Sure. Yeah, I'm down.
I'm down.
Okay. We can do it in July. How about that? We all drive together. We talk to every people. We hop out of the car. We talk to anybody you want to talk to.
But Suleiman, I think here's the point. That this trust. Let me just put this point, because Suleiman, it's not only about territorial control. This is where people fundamentally miss. It's about political control. If you look at the Minsk agreement, what was Putin's objective? To get the two provinces, Donetsk and Luhansk, give them back to Ukraine, but to ensure that those two oblasts had a veto over Ukraine's foreign policy and military affairs. Russia has consistently demanded a control over Ukraine's political direction. Always. It's not only about territory. It's about that is why the whole Zelensky argument.
But also, do you agree that the United States have also done it? Hence, why they caused a coup in Ukraine and overthrew the government.
So let's look at
no, but just a yes or no
argument. I don't look. You and I are not going to look. We reached one agreement. We're not going to reach an agreement here, like on the coup.
So I'm not
because I agree with Mickey.
So you're basically telling me I'm not going to advertise.
But you're proving my point with
telling me
Yanukovych.
I'm not going to advertise Mario's newsletter. Okay, that's fine.
So Yanukovych. Who was Yanukovych? Yanukovych has always been considered and will always be viewed by a lot of Ukrainians as beholden to Putin, just as Lushenko is in Belarus, right? But how? What Yushchenko was? I mean, what Yanukovych was Lushenko for Ukraine. That's what he was. There is a reason why he did. Although he made promises that he was going to sign an economic agreement with the European Union that guaranteed visa-free travel for all Ukrainians across the EU, which was an aspiration of Ukrainians, he turned around in the last second after Putin summoned him to Sochi and said, "You will sign with the Eurasian Economic Union," right? Because Yanukovych was beholden to Putin. What happened was, when that backfired, what did Putin do in response? By the way, this whole biolab, let me just segue. Trash, to your point, not once has Russia brought up biolabs until after the invasion, and not even after the invasion until June of 2022.
Victoria Nuland talked about it. I mean, they know that there's biolabs there, and that is, and Putin has brought it up.
Yeah, but he's not. So to be fair, he's not disputing that they exist. That's not what he's saying. What he's saying is that what I said, which was it's a convenient excuse. I'm not saying that it's not a concern. What I'm saying is it's a convenient excuse, and I think that
I just got a death threat from a Ukrainian, by the way, in the in Mario's replies. He said, "We're coming for you, so please come to Ukraine."
I know.
I don't think I'll be going to Ukraine. Yeah.
Well, Ian, and to be fair, I'm a Russian apologist, and I'm getting death threats as well. It's fascinating how people don't listen.
We'll put you in a disguise, Ian. Don't worry. You're
I'm a captain in Starfleet, and I'm getting death threats.
Guys, hold on. I was on a call, just came back. Death threats.
No,
I have a list. I have a list. No. I know it.
We're talking about going to Ukraine.
I heard it, Ian. I have a list of countries that are on my do not visit list. And it's expanding every week.
Me too.
Yeah, they probably won't want you there.
But guys, the question.
With Russian speakers.
Yeah, but the question is where. Like there's lines, because I've spoken to other interviewers that have a big audience, and there's lines that are just vague that they draw, guests they don't accept, topics they don't cover, and things they don't say to avoid, getting into serious trouble. I'm struggling to find out what those lines are. I hope I don't find out the hard way. Because I'm treading those lines.
I have less problems covering cartels than I do joining your spaces, by the way.
Yeah, that's crazy. And just to be clear, Allsource hides his identity because of the cartels. Yeah, he's saying that those spaces are worse. So that's great.
Yeah, no, Mario, but to the point, right? I think the most effective thing that you could possibly do is deploy a bunch of people and giving a bunch of death threats and saying, okay, where's the line? What don't I cross so I don't talk about it? What's happening in these spaces constantly? And I take crap for it all the time. They're like, how could you let this person speak? They're obviously Chinese propaganda, or they're Russian propaganda, or they're Ukrainian propaganda. It's like, wait a minute. So on this panel that we talk about any issue, we have both sides of the argument and the multi-dimensional both sides of the argument. And everyone is saying their piece and can push back as they see fit. This is why.
Hey, Trash, tell the audience about yesterday. Was it yesterday? And Gorka getting pissed off at the CCP guy. For anyone that wasn't there, just keep it short because many people were there. But what's just a quick overview of what happened yesterday? It was pretty fascinating. It's not the first time.
It was a couple. Cool. Yeah, it was a couple days ago, and so it was. So yeah, anytime, anybody would say anything other than completely against the Chinese, CCP. Sebastian didn't like it. It was also the same pro-Russia argument. He got very heated. He called someone a shithead, and it was a thing. It was definitely a thing. But it's just, again,
but just to add to that, Trash, just to give it a bit, his argument was this, because we had on the space. Basically a grandson of somebody whose granddad was part of Mao's regime. And so the question is, would you have that type of person on a panel to relay their position? And then I give the equivocation of, let's say, somebody whose grandfather was part of the Nazi regime. Would we allow them to have a conversation? So that's what the issue was.
And an interesting counterpoint is that, surprisingly, I was researching it, a big chunk of people in China, some people that say it's a majority, still sympathize with Mao, despite all the atrocities. Which then goes back to the question, if such a large number of people sympathize with a certain cause, shouldn't we at least give them a mic to listen to them while pushing back, while debating them? But shouldn't we at least give them a voice? Otherwise,
Yeah,
What's the
yes,
alternative?
yes. So Mario, sunlight is the best disinfectant, right? Like I will always stand on the side of free speech. I don't have to agree with you, and I'm willing to engage with you. If you come to the table honestly, I will talk to you, I will engage with you, and I will offer counterpoints. But sunlight is the best disinfectant. If we start going down the path of saying, I don't agree with what you're saying, shut that person down, it never ends well. And so,
Mr. Weinstein, you've faced that issue before. I've heard you talk about it. Where do we draw that line?
Good to be with you, first of all. I don't have much to say, but let me just push out the framework that I can't escape in case it's of use to anyone else. We're trying to execute pre-internet statecraft plans in the face of Discord, 4chan, Twitter Spaces, etc. And it would appear to me that there are three new sort of elements that have taken over. One is to deny people any ability to know what's actually going on so that everybody is forced to guess. You'll notice that there's an enormous portion of these conversations that's always based on what can we figure out, what's reliable, and somebody will always claim what's a false flag, use flag. Whatever it is, we've now got this language where ambiguity is an incredibly important part of the story, so that we all spend our time arguing with each other. The second part of the story is smearing, so that anybody who gets it right is forced to either ignore the people calling them apologists or Chinese lackeys or whatever, and you're forced to spend a tremendous amount of time clearing your name. And these are, I think, two of the most important aspects of this. And the third bit is later. I think the less is more. So forgive me, because this was about order. I think it was constantly to try to make. Oh, don't confirm. That's the last part of it. So the idea is you might find that some story, you're waiting for the New York Times or the Washington Post or the Wall Street Journal to confirm that something that you heard on Newsmax or in one of these Twitter spaces or Breitbart or some sort of outre channel is true, like the Hunter Biden laptop story. And these are the three pillars on which somehow the three legs of the stool of modern statecraft. So they're going to make everything ambiguous. They're going to smear the hell out of everyone who tries to discuss it or trips over it. And they're not going to confirm it inside the major outlets that are usually, were once upon a time used to disseminate information, but are now used to deny confirmation. Whatever that thing is, it doesn't have the backing of members of advanced societies. So this is something that has grown up in response to a new technological revolution, and just the way the printing press caused war and dislocation, whatever this new technology is, has somehow coaxed out of the vacuum this threefold strategy, which is, first of all, Mario, making you very famous. So congratulations, because you figured out how to get it to work for you. But I know that you probably would opt not to be the benefactor of this success if we could clear these things up. But what I see is on a daily basis, we're not noticing that the same thing is true for COVID. The same thing is true in both origins and vaccines. Same thing is true for inflation and its relationship to management of the monetary aggregate. Same thing is true for Epstein. Same thing is true for almost everything that we're dealing with. And what I'm begging of us is to not play this incident by incident, but to pull back and say, are these the three elements that have now grown up so that we can pretend that we're practicing democratically approved statecraft? And I'll just close with this. I said the other day, democracy is always need to know. It doesn't mean we have to know every detail, but we expect a highly competent intelligence community. We expect a highly competent State Department. And if you're going to play, James Bond games for the world, we expect them to be reasonably ethical, and we expect them to be somewhat understandable so that we can vote every 4 years for president and in between for members of the Senate. The UK has a similar issue. Other countries in Europe and Japan have similar issues. What we're seeing is a repudiation of the idea that an electorate and a citizenry has the right to even basic understanding of what is done in its name. And I've referred to this as Jessupization, based on the character of Colonel Jessup from A Few Good Men, where effectively we all understand the idea that there are things that go bump in the night that we don't want to know about. But there are too many things going bump into the night. It's too stupid. And if you look at something like the Bagram Air Force Base in Afghanistan and the pullout from that, when you exude incompetence, you lose the trust needed to do secret and cryptic statecraft, because now we don't know if you're coming for us as people, your own citizens. We don't know if you're going to subvert your allies. We don't know if you're good enough to do what you're trying to do. And what it's calling into question is, does the permanent bureaucracy, the deep state, whatever you want to call it, have the right to withhold so much information and to execute so poorly that the citizenry has no hope of acting as a check on its own runaway bureaucracy? That's where I am, and I think it's really, it doesn't have a ton to do with Ukraine. The most important thing about Ukraine is that Ukraine could be a civilization-ending event because of the presence of nukes and other exotics. And what I think we're doing is that we're clearly showing we don't believe that Americans have even the right to basically understand the U.S. involvement in Ukraine, and we're just supposed to repeat "Glory to Ukraine" and sit down and shut up, and it's just not going to work.
Eric, I agreed with almost everything. I agreed with everything you said. I just wanted like a point of clarification. You mentioned your first point about ambiguity, and you're quite right. That's essentially what happens, because you'll have any kind of situation, and you'll have the position of what one calls maybe the deep state, and then a position which is basically the anti-establishment position, or however you want to frame it. But in these new age of mediums, isn't it good that we essentially even get that? So as an example, we know when it came to the old media, whenever a certain narrative wanted to be deployed, there was a huge amount of propaganda. Example is like the Iraq war, and you didn't have the alternative position, or maybe the anti-establishment position. So with this new age of media, I agree that it does get ambiguity. So I agree with your position, but is that not better? Because you're never going to get complete confirmation of reality. Isn't that better than what we had before?
I guess what my belief is that we're not getting even basic levels of confirmation when we do guess correctly. And then we move over to this other thing of, well, you've guessed correctly, but there's no confirmation, so that you'll spend your life, every Thanksgiving dinner will be spent hating your uncle or your father because everybody's guessing differently. And, I want to say that we're becoming horrible to each other. We're yelling at each other. We're calling each other jerks and assholes and all of these things. Why? Because we can't run anything to ground. And so everybody has a new method of simplifying a complicated situation and collapsing the ambiguity. And all of these different methods, all of them don't work. I mean, sometimes you'll be the broken clock that's right twice a day when you say, oh, this is all about money. And sometimes you'll be correct when you say, oh, it's the intelligence community that's got a runaway mandate. These are black projects. Whatever it is, people are all developing these sort of all-purpose simplifications of complex reality because nobody will run anything to ground. And I think that deranging us as a society cannot possibly be in the interests of the United States. It would be better for us to lose some things overseas that we could win while we figure out some way of doing this stuff that is compatible with democracy, rather than to just decide we're going to shred the ability of normal, ordinary Americans with an above 80 IQ to have input that is meaningful on issues, potentially existential issues of state. So, what's better, what's worse? The technology is what changed everything and the end of the Cold War. And the fact is, we are going to have to come up with something. I will become unpopular with the rebels when I say that states need to not reveal everything, which is obvious. But I think that the framework that I've settled upon is you can't protect this much and be this incompetent, because your citizenry ultimately needs to know whether how they can vote you out of office. And I think when we had Anthony Fauci for nearly 40 years in the same position, appointed by every successive president, We learned what it looks like to have a biological weapons convention workaround in all probability, which is that you have things that you can't talk about, very long-standing agreements. And if those people are incompetent and potentially take years off everyone's life, as we may have had some sort of biological weapons workaround get into all of our lungs, we don't know that. And we can't ask questions, we can't hold hearings. We're now out of control. And it's important to recognize that whatever this is, it's just unworkable.
Eric, can I ask you
Yeah.
quickly? I'm interested in Jessipization. I think that's a beautiful idea, and I'm going to use it. I was wondering, in honor of Colonel Jessup, can you do your impression of Jack Nicholson giving that speech?
I can, but unfortunately, I mean, I don't think you can handle the speech.
And to be fair, he's a dad. He can't be yelling in the house, you know? I mean, to be fair, Eric. So...
Eric, I'm actually going to ask you a question, moving to a separate topic you barely touched on. A big chunk of the show earlier was about, we're trying to simulate what a nuclear conflict would look like, and we looked at a few examples where the world got close to a nuclear conflict. My question to you is, we started speaking about wealthy people and billionaires buying bunkers and buying land in all these different countries as a just-in-case insurance policy. So my question to you, do you have a just-in-case plan, or do you have any bunkers sitting anywhere?
Well, first of all, it's none of your business. Second of all,
Damn it,
no.
that was what you said. You had 2 glasses of wine. I
No,
thought
no,
I'd get
no.
away with it.
No. Look, I'm not in a position where I'm going to pretend that I can buy land in Montana and hire 3 ex-Navy SEALs and have 6 months of, canned fava beans so that I can sustain some sort of very limited Armageddon. I think most of the very wealthy people I know who are playing these games are planning for extremely limited forms of Armageddon. And I think it's very strange because they don't want to contribute their connections, their thought, their muscle, their resources towards trying to stabilize the ship. It's more like they're purchasing an extra stateroom on the Titanic in case there's a portion of the ship that's still above water. And the thing is much more likely to sink because none of the really rich, powerful, connected people are realizing there probably isn't a way to save you and your family with the 3 ex-Navy SEALs and Rangers and the fava beans. I don't think it's very realistic. But I will tell you that is where an enormous amount of energy is going, because these are capable, high agency people. And so they're doing the only things that capable, high agency people know how to do, which at the moment is defect, right? So there's sort of a prisoner's dilemma situation, which is, do you want to spend your time and energy talking to morons, or do you want to actually build shit, right? And so unfortunately, what I see is people are basically doing what they know how to do, which is to defect, not put their time and energy into dysfunctional politics and build something for themselves. But I wouldn't worry too much about these characters protecting themselves from a nuclear exchange. I would say that they're being incredibly silly. It might work if there's a very special type of disaster. But I think that they're doing the only thing that they know how to do, and more or less they're on the same Titanic you are. And they're just buying an extra stateroom for reasons that seem kind of bizarre to me.
Eric, I just wanted to bring you back to what you said earlier.
Actually, let me add one more question, kind of links to you, Slayman. That would be actually a really interesting question. So Slayman makes an argument constantly, and somebody can take over after this, because that relates to an argument you make regarding the military-industrial complex. And in some cases, he just blames a lot of the problems the world is facing on the military-industrial complex. In your opinion, Eric, how big of a role does that complex play in shaping, let's start with public discourse around wars and geopolitical confrontations?
Well, I mean, it depends what you mean. Do you start off with oil? I think that in general, energy and extraction are at the core of a lot of these things, but data is now going to have to be leavened into that military-industrial complex. Whatever that thing was that Eisenhower was talking about at the end of his time, I think is mushrooming. And I think one of the ways you can think about this is as a very primitive form of AI. In other words, instead of building a computer with silicon and logic gates, which we've done is we've done something very similar with law, with guns, with markets. And so we've been hooking up this machine. Think about the invisible hand of Adam Smith. What you see is the invisible hand is a concept that it must be steered by an invisible mind that knows what to do. That's our old notion of capitalism. And I think when you hook up all these different systems, law, markets, arms, extraction, etc., you're building what is an as-if AI, which nobody is in control of. I don't know that Joe Biden would know how to stop this thing, or the UN could, or Klaus Schwab. More or less, if you think about your entire life, it's dictated by this interlinked series of agreements and moving resources. This thing may be a doomsday machine, which is known as the stopping problem. So all of this may result in nuclear war without anybody being able to figure out how to slow it down or stop it. I was watching this call for a 6-month moratorium on large language models and forms of machine learning. How do you shut down Google if you have a shareholder responsibility? I mean, once you deploy things like ChatGPT or GPT-4 in Microsoft, you may not have a legal ability to undo things. So I think that partially what's going on is think about the entire world and all of these interlinked systems as a giant cluster that's trying to compute an outcome. And nukes might be part of that, and famine might be part of that, and weather might be part of that. And nobody's in control of it, and nobody has the brains to take over what is essentially an emergent system. So I tried to get ahead of this 5 years ago, 6 years ago, when I said we have to explode an above-ground thermonuclear weapon because we have an entire generation or 2 or 3 that's grown up since they've seen mushroom clouds and worried about the fallout. Nobody listened. Everybody thought it was completely insane. I don't know if it's so funny today. The people who've gotten out in front of this years and years ahead, whether it's Eliezer on AI or even Elon on AI, all of us who sound crazy are trying to warn you about the AI that we've built by linking armaments, the military-industrial complex, markets, extraction, and law. And nobody knows how to shut this thing down, and nobody knows whether the halting problem is about to happen in terms of a civilization-altering event.
Oh, Mario,
Eric, I agree with you there. And although Mario said about that, I agree. It's a multifactorial mechanism that which constitutes this reality, but then of which we don't have control. But then there are certain factors that impact the system and have a greater impact on the system. For example, the operating system, if we use your analogy. But coming back to what you said previously, you mentioned quite a pertinent point, and I guess the way you stated it was that not knowing, guessing is the huge problem, and essentially what you're saying is not knowing the reality of things or the truth. But again, but having that issue where you don't know, but then you know the different arguments, but you don't know which one for certain is right, is that not better than not knowing at all?
It's a distributed denial of cognition attack. Right? So the idea is, and I said this on Rogan recently, if I pile up 3 ambiguities that are independent, you have 2 to the 3rd possibilities if they're all binary. That's 8 things that you have to think about in real time. Barely at the ability of a human mind to consider 8 separate cases. If I go to 4 of them, you have 16. There's no way you're gonna be able to do that. And so in part, one of the ways that modern intelligence communities work is that they flood us with ambiguity so that everybody capitulates and throws up his or her hands. What's better, not knowing or making a guess? Neither of them work. So my claim is that in essence we are going to have to take back knowing, and by knowing, I don't mean 100% certainty. But like, have you noticed that nobody's arguing whether or not the Japanese attacked the Americans on December 7th, 1941? If that happened today, we'd have an entire discussion about false flags. Now, there actually was a situation with the, what was it, McCollum memo, where we were trying to get attacked in the Pacific in order to get a cause to enter World War II. Those things are very important. But the point is that nobody argues whether Japanese sent planes to Hawaii. In the present day, no one would be convinced. No one would absolutely know because we just don't trust anything. And when people say that this is the same as it ever was, and congratulations, Eric, you're just noticing now. I just wonder, are you stupid or are you just young? This was not the way the world worked before the Clinton administration. There were lots of lies. There were lots of things we weren't allowed to know. But when we stumbled over Iran-Contra or something like that, we held hearings. We held hearings on Church Pike, on the intelligence community. We held hearings on Watergate. What we are doing is we are protecting a very vulnerable group of people engaged in statecraft from having to answer questions for their incompetency. And I don't think it's sustainable much longer.
Eric,
What do you think is the best way to
Eric,
get
that
to the truth?
I had a question for you. Do you
I'm
think
sorry.
that trust was fundamentally broken with the Iraq War and the lies that were told about the weapons of mass destruction? Because historically, when you look back, like I was there during the, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I want to add on to that because I actually want to add a caveat. I think that's a great example, Tara, but I actually do want to ask, and this is a question I've been asking myself, Eric, over the last, 5 to 10 years, is what I knew is what I know. So did I know this, right? And so when I start opening up the layers of the onion and I start looking back and I start looking through things and I'm like, wait a minute, that was wrong. That was the approved narrative. That was what I was told. And that's what I believed. But now I have evidence that it doesn't. And I keep going back and I keep going back. And so was there a moment in time where that trust of history
3 Mile
or
Island.
information? Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of
3 Mile
examples.
Island. Jean
Well, I
Malacca
think
wrote about this, right, in Simulation Simulacra.
But that's what I'm saying, Eric. So, was there a shift, right? And Tara brought up weapons of mass destruction in Iraq war, right? People bring up 9/11. That's fine. You guys can do that. That's fine. But I'm saying that,
the Kennedy
was it,
assassination. That's another
sure.
one.
Yeah,
Was it?
so the
That's
Kennedy assassination becomes really important in some sense in retrospect. If you have to ask that question, the way I would answer it is the Super Bowl in 1971 was the moment where the Citizens Committee to investigate the FBI broke into the Media Pennsylvania branch office, stole a bunch of documents. One of them had the word COINTELPRO on it, was not known what that word meant. FOIA requests against it netted some incredible cache of documents. And I would look, actually, of all things, to the planting of a story by the FBI in the LA Times with the journalist Joyce Haybird destroying Jean Seberg, the famous actress, as, arguably the time we finally got the intelligence community dead to rights, that it was manipulating domestic news in order to destroy lawful opponents inside the United States and forced to admit it when the LA Times finally had to run a banner headline, FBI admits spreading lies. With that, we both went forward towards Iran-Contra and backwards towards Kennedy. And it's that moment which is like, well, if you lied to me about this, clearly you're capable of anything. And I think when we lied about Operation Condor and Operation Ajax in Chile and Iran, respectively, in terms of destabilizing regimes, that was seen as Dulles Brothers statecraft, the kind of thing,
Pentagon Papers,
ugly, but it's the kind of thing that in some sense Americans close their eyes and say, well, you bad boys have fun. We don't really know what you're doing. We don't know how to take care of ourselves in a dangerous world. I think when it came home and it was like, we're going to destroy your actors and actresses. We're going to keep a list of everybody to be rounded up in terms of national emergencies. We're going to have an entire thing called continuity of government that can be converted in a moment's notice towards, just dehydrated tyranny. We started to understand that this thing that you're calling the military industrial complex was completely out of control, unlike anything we knew. And I would say by the time we get to Bill Clinton, Clinton starts to usher in the idea that there's only one monoparty, because he's going to ape the Republicans, and the Democrats and the Republicans are more or less going to be two versions of the same thing, and that there's no one standing up for ordinary human beings. And I think that's when the capitulation came, where we realized, at least during Iran-Contra, we were up in arms and we were finding out things that were shocking us, and it looked like that at some level, some of our representatives really wanted to get to the bottom of things.
Well, Eric, what do you think is the value of the truth, and how do we, in this world of doubt, how do we co-create this concept of truth, and how do we protect it?
Well, yes, and Mickey, before Eric,
world, right?
please,
In the words of Bill Clinton.
Let me add on. Let me add on, because before you answer that, Mickey, thank you so much for saying that. So I would argue, Eric, and I want to posit this to you, because I like what Mickey asked, but I would posit this. Wouldn't that be a sign of a renaissance? Wouldn't that be a sign of the awakening, where people are starting to come to a realization that no matter what they were taught, no matter what they're looking at now, I mean, I could see that as being a negative. However, I can see it being a positive, that we're in a renaissance of new information, of an awakening of people, where we'd be like, you know what? I'm challenging everything that I thought I knew, but that's okay. Let me go back and challenge it, and let me get to the bottom of it. Isn't that a renaissance of a new awareness? Not necessarily, like, that's more of a white pill take, I know, but isn't
Yeah,
that
appreciate that. I don't think so. I think you need to be able to think about, what do I know that's right and what do I know that's wrong? And if what you know that's right is minuscule, and what you know that's wrong, that has been fed into your head, is malware, it's not going to be a renaissance for a long time. I do think that there's a speech that a competent president could give. By the way, I recommend everybody look at Chamberlain's farewell speech. We always talk about peace in our time. We make fun of him for appeasement. But his speech where he resigned, where he says basically there's one thing Herr Hitler doesn't understand, which is that we Britons are going to come together in his face, so F you. There is a speech that a Biden could give saying, I'm too old, and I don't think that my number two is capable of this. And we have to do something because we're in dire straits. We're going to come clean, but we can't come clean all at once. We ask you for your patience and to recognize that this is untenable. There's some crazy speech which you could give where people would know you were telling the truth, because we know what it sounds like when something has been focus grouped. We know what it sounds like when the lawyers have had at it, when the PR machine. That's why Eisenhower's farewell speech really grabs us, because we knew it couldn't be fake. It was too crazy to be fake. And I believe there are speeches that could be given, like Chamberlain's farewell speech, that the key issue is that no one who could give that speech will be allowed to become president. That's, again, I can't stand and detest Donald Trump, but it's for totally different reasons than my party, the Democrats, detest him. They hate him because he was capable of doing something completely off script. And that was the main thing that I think was attractive about him, was that he came in with no government or military experience, and he's the only president who's ever had that. What we're either looking for is an Eisenhower who can do that, or a Trump who can do that, and level with people and get them to believe again. That would make a renaissance. And by the way, I don't want to know all of our secrets. That would be crazy. What we're producing is a truth cult, because we've all been lied to so much that we're convinced. It's like if you're parched and you say, there's no such thing as too much water, and then suddenly you're hit with a flash flood. Well, it solves your thirst problem, but it doesn't solve the problem of being deluged. I think what we have is a situation in which many of us want to burn it all down. We want the truth. We think that the truth will serve us. It won't. It has to be a combination of the truth, vague things that we can't know exactly, and a small number of super secret things that maybe we can't know at all. and nobody seems to be trustworthy to do that. I think what we need to do first to have a renaissance is not just truth, but somebody has to start behaving in a trustworthy fashion, saying, you know what, I've lied for years and I'm not going to do it anymore. And I just don't know where that person is going to come from in the system.
So, Eric,
Well, there's a
just
difference
about that
between
one second,
truth.
Tara. One thing I was going to ask was, and it's about this point about knowing the truth. And now I agree with you. Part of not knowing what the truth is, or knowing for reality from fiction, is because of the dissemination of false information or misinformation. And this has been a project by the military, by the intelligence agency for decades. There's many projects on this, but specifically about this point, do you think that's the main issue, or do you think it's something more greater than that? That the reason why we don't know the truth is because what people do is, as individual humans, they like to put themselves in a box. It could be like a religious box, it could be a sectarian box, it could be a political box. And then what happens is they're not willing to rationally analyze data and information. And because they're not willing to with an open mind, that's the first part of the problem. And so it's basically it's the responsibility of the individual rather than some great leader. What's your thought on that?
I really believe that in some sense we have outlived the notion of the relationship between the individual, the leader, and the state that we had. And if you asked me in the face of social media, which it seems, of course, ridiculous that something like Discord or 4chan would be at the center of an incredible breach, because it's like, you think of that as where gamers and lunatics hang out. We don't understand how profound social media is, because so much of it is dunking, dragging, and people posting memes. What it is a complete loss of the ability to craft these very simple narratives that served for better and worse in the era before social media. So if you ask me, I really don't have the answer, and I don't know how to say this. We debate things like capitalism and communism, not realizing that there was a time before we knew either of those two words. Now, my claim is that we're now talking about new forms of government where we don't have any notion of them. I don't know what they are. You may say democracy or a republic, or late stage capitalism, but somebody's going to have to dream up new stuff that is compatible with your smartphone. And what it appears to be is that leaders, individuals in the citizenry, the state, and our technology are not compatible as they're currently configured. And if we don't come to grips with that fact, that we should be searching, if we ask, well, Eric, is it A or B or C? Like, do you think I know? I don't have a clue. And I wish more of us would say that, which is, we're searching for a system named X. I don't know what X is. And trying to shoehorn everything back into capitalism
Maybe it's
and
called
communism.
X.
Well, okay, call
Eric?
it X, but
Yeah,
we don't.
to quote Elon Musk, right? Maybe that's what it is. Maybe this is what it is. X.
Okay, well then solve for X is the point.
Eric, just
But
on
what
that.
about back to truth? I had a question about truth. What is wrong with
just
us not
Eric?
with
Sorry, Eric. Just on that. In terms of what you referred to in terms of technology, I understand your point, but won't technology and these different aspects that you're talking about cause further as technology advances, it causes a problem to further amplify. So, the issues that we're talking about in terms of the misinformation, or, for example, not knowing truths or not knowing reality, or even as AI increases, not knowing reality in itself, all of that will be amplified. And so I guess my point is, one can look for something outwardly to help fix that problem, or one can in themselves cause a movement where we're actually asking people as rational beings to use their rationale. Isn't that a more logical process, or more logical way, more easy way of going about it, as opposed to waiting for some kind of like supreme leader who's going to come up with some innovative idea?
I'm with you. Look, this will be my last question. One, because I have to do other things, but also because I don't want to monopolize the space. But let me just say what I'm doing. I'm going to get off this call and I'm going to go back to doing what I'm almost always doing, which is trying to figure out equations for physics beyond Einstein, because it's time to spread out. And when I say that, people think, well, that's loony talk. Well, if you ask me, Mario is going to hold a bunch of these spaces over the coming 3 weeks, and they're all going to end in the same muddle, and they're all going to have the same basic characteristics that super smart people who come together and are relatively civil, and I commend Mario for that, are going to fail to come up with conclusions, and they're going to come back to this as entertainment because we're all just fiddling. Right now, the most imperative thing is we have to be running separate experiments, and we've got one atmosphere. That one atmosphere carries radiation, it carries pathogens, and it carries climate problems. If we do not spread out from this one atmosphere, you're going to run one crazy experiment that is too big for anyone to understand. And is it a Hail Mary? You bet your ass it is. But in a world with an $85 trillion economy, I think that the allocation to trying to figure out how to diversify beyond the solar system is zero. Like, nobody's working on this problem. So the way I'm going to vote is I'm going to vote with my feet, which is I'm going to do as much of this as I can, and I'm going to go right back to equations, trying to figure out if we had to spread out, because not all of us are going to make it, how do we not have all of humanity's eggs in this one beautiful basket we call the Earth with its one atmosphere? And you can divvy up the lines and say this about the Donbass and that about, historical Poland. But the fact of the matter is that it's not going to matter very shortly. With the AI, with what we're able to do with nucleic engineering in terms of nucleotides in the cell, and what we're able to do with fusing nuclei, we're not long for this place. We've had a beautiful 75-year nap, or whatever it is, coming from World War II. Almost nobody remembers World War II. It's all coming to a close, and we're going to restart history with great, powerful toys that have never been used on each other. And I think it's clear that that's about to happen. And the fact is that I guarantee you nobody is calling to have a conversation with me at the highest levels of government. So I hang out on Twitter Spaces and I talk to you all, which I have to say, given what's on offer, it's an honor and it's really great to be here. And I'm going to go back to work trying to figure out something I can do on my own. So thanks very much.
Thanks, Eric. Another sleepless night for me, but thank you for coming back.
Thank you for your insights. Always
Slayman,
wonderful.
your thoughts from the discussion?
No, I appreciate Eric's insights.
I know that me and you geek out when Eric comes on.
I mean, you geek out when Eric comes on, but I appreciate his thoughts.
Mario.
Yeah. I mean, I appreciate his thoughts, and he does provide a different perspective and different ideas, and so that's why I wanted to ask him some questions just to see, his thought process and what his argument is and what's the solution. So that's the reason I was asking those questions.
Mickey, what are your thoughts on what was just discussed? I know you're trying to jump in a couple of times.
I think
Hey,
it's
Mario,
actually
just
really interesting. His
FYI,
point,
you're
his
coming in
perspective.
very far. It's very hard to hear you.
Oh, okay, it's better now, yeah? Go ahead, Deb.
Yeah, it's better now.
Something Eric was saying, which is maybe we can incorporate into these spaces, but he's what's the conclusion at the end of these conversations, instead of sort of us all some agreeing, some disagreeing. Maybe we should.
But this is this goes against the spaces. I just don't think we're in a position to come to conclusions. I just don't think there are conclusions either. I think the only conclusion that I have from the spaces is dialogue, is communicate. There might be maybe minds that are changed. Many people asking, what other conclusions can we come from than Liam?
We can agree
other than
we
communicate
can
and
agree
listen
to
to
some
others.
basic facts in a discussion. I understand in a debate,
many,
yes,
but
to have two sides that are both sort of equally, starred in dignity. And that if our goal is to entertain a group of people on the stage and put on a good show for them, then yes, let's agree on nothing. Let's show off how smart we are.
But Liam, let's.
I don't
Liam,
understand
no,
how we
I
could
don't.
come to any sort of agreement on this particular space. Just
Liam,
talking about
is
this one, right?
No, hold on. Yeah, just do not this one. In general, Liam, and I'm glad you kind of pushed back on this. So when you say what conclusion can we get to, who's we? Because it's multiple people on this show, tens, hundreds of thousands of people
jump
listening.
in and out. Yeah.
Different people will come in at to different conclusions. I think.
I mean, I do agree with Liam. So basically, I think there are certain facts that everyone can agree on.
Exactly.
Not agreeing on it. Just,
the
water.
water.
But then what happens is then there's certain ideas And those ideas you can't agree on. And the reason is because when people are coming at a certain idea, they're coming from a perspective. So let's just take this political issue. When we've got people who are like pro-Ukraine, they're coming from a certain perspective and a certain framing, and people who are pro-Russia are coming from a certain perspective and certain framing. So on that, you can't. And what Eric was saying was, look, you've got this information, you've got people who are, let's take this as an example. You know, someone could be pro-Ukraine and someone could be pro-Russia, and we don't know what the truth is. Someone mentioned bioweapons. We don't know the exact reality of it, but then there are some bases of it that you can get facts for it. But then would someone who is pro-Ukraine be willing to accept them facts? Or, for example, if there was something about Putin, would someone who's pro-Russia be willing to accept facts?
Simon, let me try with Liam. Liam, what? So other than look at the basics, communicate with the other side, be with an open mind. The other side is not evil. Try to stick to facts, verify everything. Those are basics that I think I want people to agree on because they're very broad. But beyond that, on specific issues, it's difficult to come to an agreement, at least as us as a whole. And when you say us, I think you mean like just kind of the panel and the moderators and myself. But that kind of makes it difficult to keep the dialogue going. Do you know what I mean, Liam? It's not for entertainment, but I think the foundational points are very broad. Facts.
I think
Communicate.
there's
The other
something
side is not
far
evil. Don't
more
be binary.
significant we can agree on, which is to agree on substantially, even if we disagree about the outcome of the debate, to agree with each other about what it is we are debating. For instance, when we were discussing, you know, the referendum and the law around the referendum, and I specifically chose, you know, to restrict my comments to the legal aspect of the Quebec secession case as the Supreme Court of Canada and the Supreme Court of the United Kingdom recently ruling about Scotland, you know, to say, all right, this is a legal argument about how to succeed from your country if you are a culturally distinct people who wish to exercise your free right to vote, right? And then a bunch of people came in and said, oh, but NATO would do this, and no, NATO would do that. So we can agree on some basic facts, but we can also agree with each other what it is we're debating, what we're not debating, and what the parameters of that debate are.
It's actually a really interesting question, because something Eric was saying, which has really made me think, which is that basically we had so much more because there was fewer inputs previously. There was so much more of this broad consensus on what happened and what was happening up until you're saying until Clinton, and now with all these inputs, we don't have a system yet. At least I don't know of one where we can filter through all the information we have and broadly have consensus on what we all believe is true, and we don't even have a good way to even figure out what.
Yeah, but Mickey, like this is why I was asking Eric a question. Like, is consensus good? If consensus on falsehood is still not good, it's probably worse.
Yeah, but even that the good thing about forming consensus, good or bad, is at least you can like get a group of people to go do something. And I'm not saying it's good or bad necessarily, but it's like, how do we even?
No, but if you get a consensus, so Mickey, like if you get a consensus of people to do something based on falsehood, would one not argue that could be that is an evil act in itself, and the result of that could also be evil, such vis-a-vis the Iraq War?
For sure, and it's more broadly like, okay, is there a way for us to get to what's true? Like, I was just thinking about myself, right? I am Taiwanese, lived in Taiwan, spent a lot of time in Ukraine, so I have these experiences that I want to share in these spaces. I want to share what I know, but then there's things we all talk about. People talking about Israel, I know very little, or Syria, I know very little. I can't say much there, and I just sort of read the news and do my best. And the one thing I take inspiration from Eric's statement is he's like, just do your best to tell the truth, and maybe that's all we can really do at this point. Like, how do we all get to agreements now? Because now there's just so much information and content. Like, how do we agree on things? How do we know what's true?
Well,
like, it's going to be even harder as time goes on.
One way
is it just going to be what ChatGPT says, and they're going to decide what's true?
One way is to say out loud what values you're using that underpin your decisions. We don't have to agree factually on a bunch of things that support your side of an argument or my side of an argument. But one of the reasons why I support Ukraine isn't because I'm, some kind of Ukrainian national. Like, I'm not. It's because since the Second World War, we have successfully implemented an international order where we do not permit countries to use warfare for the purpose of territorial expansion. That has benefited us. It has created, together with some other things like the creation of the European Cold Steel Community, the European Union, an area of peace that heretofore I don't think we really could have imagined. I value that. I place more priority on that than I do, for instance, someone else who says, well, I want Putin to stop there. I don't want to anger Putin. I don't want to provoke Putin. I don't want to, make him use weapons he hadn't contemplated using before, or attack territories, or engage him with NATO, which becomes World War III. So I'm interested in engaging in appeasement. And if we can say that out loud, then we can agree with each other. This is an argument between someone who believes in the international world order and is willing to go to war over it, and someone else who doesn't, who is willing to give up pieces of the world and allow countries to expand using warfare rather than avoid some larger conflict. Those are your values, those are my values. Now that we've agreed on that, we can discuss facts in a way that help us to have a real conversation.
But even
Wait,
then,
wait,
like
can I jump in? Because you just contradicted yourself right
even
there.
what you said, is a framing based on your guess Americanized
Right. So you tell me what your values
version
are,
of what
and we'll
reality.
frame them based on that.
Yeah. So it's your Americanized version of what
Nothing I
you
said is
think
Americanized, sir. I am
reality.
not American.
No, and I'll explain why. I'll explain. Westernized, or however you want to frame it. But basically, as an example, because you basically specifically talked about increasing your territory, but that isn't the thing that only causes war or causes dysfunction in the international world. For example, we know the fact that America has invaded a number of countries has also caused it. That isn't to increase America's territory, but it did cause it. So it's not as simple as saying that just that would create this kind of situation of an international world order. But from an international perspective, there are many things that is an increase in territory that causes chaos in the world, causes destruction, death, murder, and mayhem, and so on and so forth.
Do you think that ChatGPT and like AI is going to be the decide? Like Eric was talking about technology and how we didn't have a system of government that was ready for Discord and mobile and AI. Do you think that eventually, like whoever creates the most trustworthy algorithm is just going to be the decider of truth, and we're all going to go use that as our reference? So we're going to type in ChatGPT like, did this ship get sunk at this time? Okay, we all agree.
Sorry, go ahead. Mickey made a point, but go for it, Josh. I'll go after you.
No, I want to go back. So like, I feel like the limitations of AI, or the understanding of the learning algorithm within AI, is only limited to whatever was post 20 or pre 2021, right? So it's a very limited scope of understanding or machine learning. But the machine learning or the access to the information is only as good as humans were up until 2021 that designed the learning algorithm. So I think that AI is going to be limited at our own limitation as a people. So I don't think it's going to be that good. If AI gets to a point where it can actually take what it's learned pre 2021 and actually be able to apply its own learning algorithm, meaning AI can actually teach itself to bypass the limitations of what it means to be a human and learned existence, that it becomes a danger. But we don't have that technology yet. I know they're trying to develop the technology, and I understand why they would try to. I mean, if you want AI to be a viable solution moving forward, it needs to have a learning algorithm above and beyond what it's programmed to learn. So if it can actually teach itself and refine itself to actually be learning on its own understanding of learning, not its understanding of human learning, at that point up to, again, 2021, then I don't think that it's actually a threat. But the moment that we can actually program it to actually teach itself to supersede the own human understanding of learning that is actually doing the programming is where we're actually going to get into a problem. But we're not there yet, I don't think. I mean, you guys can correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think we're there yet.
So, Mickey, I was just going to comment on your point because I just thought it was a very, very astute point what you made. When you come to truth, no, I don't believe that AI gives you what is truth, but AI gives you what someone programs into it, and so that's why I was doing that back and forth with Eric, because I actually think that the solution to the problem isn't some like messianic figure or some supreme leader or some leader who can actually solve this issue. I think it's like an internal thing. So from an individualized perspective, that you basically are in search of truth. You rationally analyze information and data, and if enough people do
But you
that, then
can't.
we can have a better
But
society.
Slam, but you just can't say enough people rationally analyze information when as a species we're just not rational. So how your solution just doesn't work. There should be a system that kind of replaces
You
that
are
human
right.
irrationality.
I don't even disagree with you, because actually, if you look from the dawn of time, one of the main issues that humanity had, or the problems they had, is that they always submitted to authority. They never used the rationale, but that is the plight of man, to basically go against that.
I don't think that's always been historically. I just don't
I
think.
mean, it has been. It has been. So, as an example, if you look at many of the religious texts, whatever religion you talk about, this is one of the issues in
Yeah,
the
but I think.
but it means there was always a problem throughout history. There's my
Yeah, but
argument.
without. Yeah, no. But when there isn't an authority that kind of just compensates for that irrationality, the alternative wasn't that great either. There hasn't been any decentralized societies where one's rationality made the wheels turn. So what I'm saying is that instead of replacing it with human rationality, which at least for now just doesn't exist, I don't know how that could change. The solution could be.
Sorry. I mean, Mario, using human rationality in the search for truth and to disseminate information. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, but I just don't see that to be a solution. I just feel like their solution is something a lot less interesting, a lot less exciting, in my opinion. It's a system-based solution. And the more decentralized that system, I don't know. I don't know what the system could be. Go ahead, Tara.
I was going to say, I think what you're alluding to is emotional intelligence. It's like our technology collectively has gone beyond emotional intelligence, and AI, because it's programmed by humans, right? It can't learn emotional intelligence. That's something beyond its capabilities. I mean, here we are. The whole discussion was about nuclear war risk. Here we are. We have all this technology. Why would rational, as you would say, Mario, why rationally would we take ourselves to the brink of this? Why use our technological advancement to harm one another? And so that's the real question, I think.
Yeah, and so let's go back to your point, the rational search for truth. There's no way humans can stop being, can get rid of confirmation bias, for example. Like the search for truth is already there. We're just not very good at it. Now you might say no, it's being influenced by mainstream media, the military complex. I think even if those central entities weren't there to skew that search for truth, I think our own biases are there to kind of ruin it.
And I agree with you. So I'm saying what you're saying is right. That is the problem within man, and so for man, his actual reason for his existence, not reason for his existence, but a part of his existence is to fight against that conformity and to use your rational mind, because we're easily, unfortunately, when it comes to humans, they easily submit to the will of others.
Ah, man, I don't know. Like, what do you mean? Like the purpose of humans is to sit there fighting the inability to be influenced. No, sorry, fighting influence, fighting control.
The search for truth.
The search for truth is the search for truth is a necessity for survival, man. Than just finding out the truth. But I just don't, man. You can't depend on humans to be logical, bro. Like we've had hundreds and hundreds of years, thousands of years to try to become rational. Just it's not getting any better. So I just feel the solution is something. If there is a solution, I don't know if there is something that we just cannot come up with yet. We could just test different things. I know the whole concept of decentralization is coming in. Now we've got code making decisions for us. But then again, can you remove those human biases from code? Could that be the solution? I have no idea, bro.
Thanks for your contribution, John, and I agree with almost everything you said. You try to trash me, but trying is good enough. Colonel.
Yeah, hey, I'm glad things have calmed down a little bit, and Mario, I truly appreciate you bringing Eric in because I think he spoke with a clarity that a lot of us truly appreciate. And there's no way, and I completely agree with him, and there's no way that I could have spoken with that. But something that you said kind of resonated with me, and it made me think through a current issue, right? And what the government's doing. And look, I might be a military guy and I might have served 30 years, but I've been to combat 7 times, and I tell you, I hate war, right? I'm with Tara. I don't want war. I truly don't. I think it is one of the most obscene, horrible things on the planet. But when we talk about Ukraine, I've been advocating very hard for the United States to send F-16s. You might disagree with that, and that's completely okay. But as I dive into this issue, right, one of the things that I find that's absolutely fascinating is the government's created this situation where they've created false arguments and they throw these out into public, and then we all fight about them, right? Whether or not the F-16 is survivable in the S-300 and the S-400 threat ring, or they're too much money. And at the end of the day, all these actual narratives that we fight about, whether or not that they're operationally capable or the training timelines, none of that's actually true. I truly don't believe it. I think that this is a political decision. It's a policy decision that the current administration doesn't want to have a discussion about. So we end up, right, having these ridiculously long arguments on whether or not an F-16 can survive in a surface-to-air missile system, and I bring that up only because of this, right? And I think actually Tars probably end up going to agree with me on this. If Ukraine's been flying in a war for a year against the Russian surface-to-air missile systems with not only fourth generation aircraft, but also third generation aircraft, and they're still flying, perhaps the Russian surface-to-air missile systems, the S-300 and S-400, are not as capable as once perceived by the U.S. military. And if that's the case, maybe the F-16 is a good enough airplane in today's world to actually fly. Why are we spending so much money on F-35s and F-22s and the new X-bomber that's coming out? Because I'm not so sure. These are really expensive new future weapon systems.
F-15E.
And I would venture to say,
So happy you said
that Lockheed Martin would probably not be very happy if F-16s did go in and actually started kicking ass on, the Russian surface-to-air missile systems. So what's the point of spending all the extra money on the F-35? So anyway, I'll wrap this up really quick, right? I think Eric's 100% correct. I think that the governments they've gotten really good globally at throwing out false narratives and then letting places like this just rip each other apart when the actual issue's been buried and they don't want us to talk about it.
I mean, you made an extremely true statement about Lockheed Martin and their and if you can go deeper into the way they propagated stealth, the idea of stealth. I haven't heard someone put all those arguments that are so key together in one statement in a while. So
I think we shouldn't estimate the strength of Lockheed Martin's marketing department. Particularly, like, one of the great metaphors in salesmanship of all time is someone who can sell ice to Eskimos. Well, Canada has need of a fighter interceptor to fly over the North Pole to intercept, Russians who come knocking on NORAD's door. That's like that's probably the chief function of the Royal Canadian Air Force. And occasionally, they will go overseas in support of some kind of NATO mission or UN mission. But their chief thing they do is fly up north. That's why for years we've paid a premium to fly F-18s instead of F-16s, because an F-18 has a higher likelihood that it will start in cold weather because it has two engines, and if only one engine starts, the other engine can start the other. But someone at Lockheed Martin, in this brilliant, super genius marketing department, has persuaded the government of Canada, which, by the way, during the election said they would never buy the plane, that for their Polar Fighter Interceptor, they are going to buy a stealth aircraft, that we need stealth to intercept, for instance, the equivalent of a Russian B-52. So, I mean, we're making the point about like whether Lockheed Martin will be happy or not, but I actually don't think we should gloss over that, because they are powerful enough that they caused at least one government, the government of Canada, to reverse a position that it took very, very demonstrably in a national election, because they said, look, no, this is too expensive. We have public health care. We're going to pay for health care. We are never buying the F-35. And now Trudeau's buying a whole wing of F-35. So, like, I hear your point. I know you said it with your tongue in your cheek, but I believe it.
Yeah, Liam, Katma, I want to piggyback real quick, right? So since Lockheed Martin and the United States governments refused to send F-16s and they're not willing to do it, I've actually made a call to the European defense industries, and I think for a $30 million gamble, whether it be Airbus with the Eurofighter and the Typhoon, or whether it be Saab with the Gripen, if they send these airplanes in, which are fourth generation fighters, are relatively similar to F-16s, and they actually prove to be combat proven and effective,
I think Lockheed Martin's in a world of hurt, right? Because if you can slap a token on your airplane that says combat proven against the S-300 and the S-400, and you're selling them at a fraction of the cost of what an F-35 goes out for, that's going to be a big issue. So I've made the call out here in Europe. We'll see what happens. Again, I realize there's a lot of people that disagree with me on how much the world should be supporting Ukraine. I get that. I hopeful people understand that that's not the foundation of the argument that I'm trying to make
Yeah,
right
the
now.
most important part of the marketing that I can discern that helps people sell it politically is the idea of the supply chain. That if your country does not purchase the F-35, then no component of it will be built in your country, and the jobs that come with it, which are substantial, are attached to the idea of these government contracts. But the second most substantial idea is the idea of like nationalism. Look at the flag of your country flying this plane, and it works. If Lockheed Martin refuses to provide these planes, and then someone else does and they work, I think they run the risk of really having egg on their face that they had the opportunity to participate. And I mean, let's imagine the Ukrainians are victorious. That's a lot of egg on your face to say, you could have participated, but you chose appeasement instead.
Yeah, absolutely. And real quick, Lockheed Martin's in a situation where F-35 orders and F-16 orders are going out for the next 3 years. I mean, they're literally fat on orders, whereas Airbus is very concerned. They might have to be shutting down their production line along with the Saab Gripen because they just don't have orders coming in right now. So Lockheed Martin's in this wonderful situation, and it's somewhat frustrating.
Well, maybe it's
I'm sorry,
time
Tara,
for
I stepped
Avro
on you. I
Canada to
apologize.
bring back the Avro CF-105 Aero.
Oh man,
Colonel, are you familiar
I
with
can't
this
believe.
concept?
There's a good miniseries on that from
Yeah,
from
there's
Canadian,
a really good. I
TV,
just wondered if Jeff had seen it because he obviously is actually a pilot and I'm not. I only sort of read Combat Aircraft magazine and fascinate about these things in my quiet moments. But yeah, once upon a time, Canada was manufacturing a fighter jet, and still, according to all the performance that it had at the time, could perform well enough to shoot down these Chinese weather balloons, and still, I believe, outperforms the F-16 in a variety of categories. Canada doesn't make cars. We make car parts, and we export them to the United States. But if Jeff was familiar with the Avro Aero, that would warm my cockles.
I am, but I feel bad because I stepped on Tara, and I think she has something to say.
Yeah, and thank you for that, Colonel. Tara, go ahead. I know you.
I just think it's really remarkable to talk about F-16s or anything when it's been made clear that would be a red line, and that once those weapons are in the air, once this war is in the air, that would mean a hot war and an escalation. So while Lockheed Martin wants to sell its toys and wants to make a lot of money, the losers are American citizens, Ukrainians, and Russians and Europeans, frankly. It's really strange to hear you talk about all these fighter jets as if it's a fun thing when it's really a symbol of the beginning of the end and also a hot war. That's my opinion. You
Wait, but Russia
justify
said
why
that
we
about
would
10
need
other red
F-16s.
lines.
Yeah, I mean, he's used hypersonic missiles, which was a red line for the West. He's actually bombed citizens, which was a red line for the West. He's now an indicted.
Ukraine bombed citizens. They're bombing
Wait a
them like
minute.
there was just another one today.
Tara, can we please talk about that, right? So if you have a situation where you literally
Can you define what your definition of a red line is, just to be clear?
Are you talking about mine or Tara's?
Yeah. Yours, man.
Yeah. So the West has come out and has laid out what they said. They don't want escalation in the war, and continually escalation in the war, in my opinion, Mario, is a red line, right? They've tried to find ways not to allow this to escalate, and Putin continually finds way. But I think that there's an academic issue here, especially look, I've flown air combat for a very, very long time. Higher altitude domain is not available to either side, right? So you don't have the high domain. You don't have the ability to actually allow GPS weapons to find precision targets. If you watch the videos of what's going on with the helicopters and the way they're shooting rockets, right? They have to fly very, very low level. They pitch the rockets up into the air, and then it's like throwing lawn darts, right? So when we talk about Ukraine actually targeting civilians, yes, unfortunately that's happening. And I say unfortunate because here's the deal. They're not able to use precision weapons. These things are affected by air. They're not being employed in the way that they're correctly supposed to be employed. However, I will point out Ukraine is not shooting long-range drones that are using GPS. They're not shooting long-range rockets as in off of UAVs. Russia is shooting massive amounts of waves of UAVs at high altitude. Yes, the 75% to 80% are being intercepted, but the 20 to 25% that are getting through that are precision weapons are actually targeting Russian citizens. So it's a false narrative to say that, well, Ukrainians are doing it too. Ukrainians are literally shooting the only way that they can, which is low altitude pitch up rocket attacks, which is very, very, unfortunately, it's not precise.
But there aren't trained Ukrainian pilots. That's the other issue.
No, that's not true. That's absolutely not true. They have tons of trained pilots.
And there's been a lot of data talking about how even the U.S. military is talking about ways to train Ukrainian pilots, that there's simply not enough that know how to do it. But the point is that
the Ukrainian spokespeople have 50 pilots ready to go to be trained that speak very good English to actually come in. The Chief of Staff of the United States Air Force, C.Q. Brown, took 2 Ukrainian pilots. He sent them in a relatively covert manner all the way to Tucson, Arizona, to do an assessment to see how quickly they could be trained. In less than 1 month, they realized that the Ukrainian pilots could be trained to fly F-16s in well under 6 months. I don't know where you're getting your narratives, but I can show you all these press statements that show that all these people exist.
All right, so let's say you have trained Ukrainian pilots taking this war to the air. What possibly good outcome will come from that when I
can tell you exactly. Let me tell. Can I answer that, please? Because
yes,
I will
absolutely.
tell you that when an air campaign happened in 1999 with overwhelming power, which is the Powell Doctrine, when you go to war, you don't want to win 51 to 49. You want to win 99 to 1. In that war in Serbia, okay, with only an air war, it lasted 78 days. It was done. Slobodan Milosevic capitulated.
How many civilians died?
Let me finish, please. Exactly. I'm getting there. Please. 3,500 civilians. Those are Serbian numbers. 3,500 people died in 78 days. In this war, that's going to be a rounding error, okay? So yes, overwhelming force. You do not allow two sides to continually fight at the same level because you literally will have a war of attrition. So if you want this war to end, the answer is quite simple. Give them overwhelming force, let them go in, and bring Putin to the negotiation table after they get Crimea back.
Colonel,
oh my gosh! There's no way they will bring Crimea back. That will lead to World War III, and that we can go back to the whole. And not to forget that even mainstream media will admit this, that 80 to 90% of Crimeans, even polled today, do not want to go with Kiev. They want to stay with Russia. And let's say, and let's look at that.
So
of course they want to stay with Russia. They've already voted.
A vote at the end of a gun barrel is not a vote.
We need to get them to vote again and again until we get the
there's an
result that we
international
want,
organization called
it's got,
they go in and do
gotta
elections
keep them
monitoring.
voting
Bring
over
to
again.
Crimea.
Right. 1 second, Colonel. You just let Ian have an input, and then you'll come back because you've spent 20 minutes making your point. So Ian, and then Colonel, go for it, Ian.
Yeah, I think it's a bit absurd to tell them to have a vote again. I mean, what is this? The fucking Nevada election? How many votes are you going to have? Are you going to vote until you get a result that you want? Like, this is ridiculous and it's impossible. And furthermore, the people living there, they don't want to become a part of Ukraine. They're not wanted in Ukraine. And let's just say, for the sake of argument, okay? Let's just say Ukraine manages to take Crimea. What happens then? Are they going to expel every single person living in Crimea? Are those people just going to move to Russia? I mean, what are we looking at? Are we looking at ethnic cleansing here? Is that going to be humanitarian? I mean, Does the UN have to step in and put some blue helmets on the ground and have them, take over the place for 5 years, 10 years? Like, how long did East Timor get basically taken over by the United Nations? Not that it was bad for them to be there, but I mean, what's the end game here, right? I mean, what are we looking at here? Like, realistically, if Ukraine does take it, which it's very unlikely, I don't think they will, but let's just say for the sake of argument that they do take it, what happens then? What happens to the people living there? Are they going to be hunted down and killed and executed? Like all the so-called collaborators that were killed in all the other places that they've managed to retake, right? I mean, I think no one is really wanting to ask these questions because they don't want to hear the answers. The answers are not very nice, right? We know what the answers are. It's going to look like an ethnic cleansing. It's going to look like mass executions. So I don't think people want to ask the question. So, I mean, if we're all acting like we're liberals in here and we want to do this for a humanitarian purpose, then we have to be realistic. We have to be honest about this. Like, what does this actually look like? If you actually do care about these values, liberal values, then actually ask the real questions. Be honest about it and come up with a proper solution. Because this wishy-washy notion that the people living in Crimea are suddenly just going to embrace the Kiev regime doesn't make a lot of sense, right? It's not realistic. It's not grounded in reality at all. Whatsoever. So, if we want to pretend that we're liberals, then be honest about it and let's talk about the solutions.
Wait, but so just to interject real quick. You kind of did it again and didn't put forth any solutions. Oh, my bad.
So number one, I'm not a liberal, and to look at this war through a political lens is absolutely ludicrous. Okay, you need to stop with the name calling because I think that's absurd. Number two, with respect to Crimea falling or not falling, I will tell you what. The Russians believe that there's a very good chance it's going to fall because if you look at the amount of money that they've invested in defending in multiple levels of lines in defense that Crimea is going to fall, you'll realize that they get it. Like, they're scared to death that they're going to lose Crimea. They're investing over 30% of their current military effort just to kind of shore up Crimea. So they get it. They think it's going to fall, or they're very afraid it's going to fall.
It's not that they think it's going to fall. They have to defend it, right? I mean, if they don't defend it, then it will fall. I mean, doesn't that make sense? I mean, don't you have locks on your doors? I mean, you don't assume that a person's going to break in, right? But you can.
Ironically, I do have locks on my doors, and if someone broke into my house and then after they took 25% of my house and said they wanted to negotiate peace, I tell them to fuck off and say get out of my goddamn house.
That is not what I'm saying. I'm saying that you have locks on your house because you assume.
Ian, I let you speak, buddy. Ian, I let you speak. Let me speak.
You are turning this metaphor against me, which is not what I intend.
The man's a combat officer. I think we can show him the respect of allowing him to speak.
I don't care.
Your mom cared.
Like, why does it matter?
And I think that speaks volumes, right? I think that I'm good. All right.
Yeah. Because that's
if you're a combat
of
officer and a
the
veteran, I think
validity
you
of
can
your
handle
argument,
a bit
Ian.
of
If you're
banter.
not
I don't think you need somebody defending you, telling me that I need to shut up so that you can speak. I mean, are you a baby? I don't think so, right? You don't think you're a baby. So I think it's.
I'm absolutely not a baby, but I will tell you, there's at least 14 general officers that have come out publicly from the United States military that do say that Crimea is going to fall and is going to come back into the correct hands. And if you want to have a fair vote, let's have a fair vote. It's not about taking a vote until you find the right answer.
Who decides what the fair hands are? I mean, does America decide who the fair hands?
But he wasn't talking about the United States.
I mean, this is not. That doesn't even make any sense. Also,
it's not the United States. I said there's an international organization called the OSCE. It is located in Vienna, Austria. I worked there as a diplomat. There's 57 nations that are involved there. Under the umbrella of that organization, please let me finish. Under the umbrella of that organization, there's a section called ODIHR, which does election monitoring. They actually come to the United States and do election monitoring. And when the votes took place in Crimea, ODIHR was denied the ability to go in and actually do it. So if we want to have a fair election, let's do that. Let's send ODIHR in and let's have people vote and let's actually get an international certified valid election. Stop telling me that the election that happened at the end of a gun barrel, when I was actually a diplomat there in 2014 and watched what happened, that was somehow a fair election. That's ludicrous.
Kurt, I've got a question for Colonel and Ian. One second. I've got a question for Colonel and Ian. And I'd be interested actually how you both answer this. So I'm not sure how you would. Would you be okay with another election, but overseen by the organization Jeff said, as well as a joint with Russia? So a joint Russia.
100%. 100%.
Yeah, sure. I'd be okay with it.
See, I think that would be a good way of getting some kind of agreement. I think that would be a good way of.
It'd be insulting to the people living there, but I'd be okay with it. Like me personally, I think that would make.
I'd be totally fine with
Look
it
at
as long as Zelensky and Putin still get to fight their duel. I think that should happen.
I think we all want to see that happen.
I mean, if the war's based on that, then Russia's already won, haven't they?
Yeah, Russia wins in that case. Yeah,
I don't know, man. Zelensky's scrappy.
I mean, he might
He's not a fighter. He's a
put
comedian.
out a nice little ballet dance. So that if it's a dance off, then I'm not sure.
Lomachenko was a ballet dancer
He can do
as well.
a dance off. Yeah, Putin is an actual fighter, right?
Well, if it's a dance off, then Mario has to go.
Yeah, but Mario will go for you. Oh, we don't know what Mario will go for. He keeps telling us he's neutral. So, and John.
Oh yeah, I didn't want to kind of dogpile on Ian, but there were some certain like intrinsic like falsities that you kind of put forth. Tara as well, but yeah, and I get where you're coming from. I understand your point because there were kind of times where I found myself understand, kind of getting to that area, of I don't care, but you can't say that because you just argued to earlier, like 15 minutes ago, about looking at both sides, and then you just said you don't care about someone's side simply because they disagree with you. So
No,
that's kind of what
I did say I didn't care about his opinion. I said I didn't care about his veterancy. That's all I don't care about because I don't think it's pertinent to the conversation.
I mean, we can agree to disagree on that one, but there's some things you guys kind of made, like a lot of these statements, but you didn't back anything up. You kind of just spoke real fast, and there wasn't really much backing it up. Tara, you made multiple false statements that didn't that I don't know what they were grounded in.
Well, then specify the false statements.
So what are the false statements, John? Let's hear 'em.
So I think the one that kind of stood out the most to me was this idea that that because Ukraine doesn't occupy ethnically, right, mostly of Crimea, they still don't have a right to take it back, and it's something you both kind of propagated. So I tried to pick one that
I didn't make
kind
that
of both
argument.
put
I think
forward.
I made that, but I didn't say that specifically. No.
Yeah, but you didn't say those specific words. But I mean, you so as much said it though. I mean, did you not?
What about ethnic cleansing? Yeah, sure. I mean, that's been ongoing.
But I mean, so while I don't support what some of the actions that Ukraine has taken after they have made sweeping counteroffensives, I wouldn't account it to ethnic cleansing. Ethnic cleansing is closer to what you would see that happen to the Armenians, things that Russia has actually propagated, or the way that Russia has actually gone after people. Or we can talk about the systematic taking of children. That's something you can talk about.
That's not been actually proven. No, I don't think that's
the
not
battle
proven.
space.
That hasn't been proven. That's just an allegation.
It's a simple fact that you're not seeing that at scale when Ukraine
Like
goes through a
it
battle
is
space.
proven.
That it's
Look at the
horrendous,
European
That's a
media.
fact.
BBC is reporting on it.
Oh, the
Yeah,
BBC reported on it? It must be true.
Even Russian state media
There's
has been
nobody on the ground who's actually claiming this, right? No one who's in these camps, right? These refugee camps has even said this. So I mean, I don't know where they're getting their reporting from.
That's 100% not true.
Yeah, but
The children
who's putting
were
the
taken from
refugees in
war
refugee
zones
camps?
and rescued. The children were rescued. They were not kidnapped.
Oh, the
So
children.
they were rescued from what? They were rescued from going to the
They're
From
rescued from a war
shelling
zone.
by this was in the Donbass.
Both sides are
war.
shelling a place, and if Russia controls a certain area, of course they're going to evacuate the citizens. I mean, what do you expect them to do? Let them die? I mean, we would be.
That would have
been
a war crime.
They brought them afterwards.
We would
They
be
didn't
saying, "Oh
bring
my
them back
God,
to their
look, the
families.
Russians
They
are
just
letting
took
all the
them."
civilians die. They're letting them be killed by these artillery shells." I mean, look,
the Russians are
as much as you
shooting
want to
precision
portray,
weapons into
as
freaking
much as you
apartments.
want to
Of course,
portray
they want
Russia
people to
just
die.
as this genocidal Hitler-esque machine, that's not the case at all. Like, I mean, that's not reality.
That's not what I was doing.
I know you're not doing that, but that is what the media is
on my
trying to do,
points.
right? I mean, when you have these news outlets, particularly the British press, not so much the American press, because I think the American press has slightly higher standards, right? But when you have the Telegraph, the Sun, and the Daily Mail, and so on, all reporting on,
but I'm not even
genocidal
using
Hitler
press
regime,
as a source.
Can I say something? I wanted to bring it back to the UN Security Council last week that just addressed this issue, because one of the remarkable things is they brought witnesses, they brought proof, and you know what happened at the UN Security Council? I don't know if you all know this, but the UK and US cut the UN web feed and wouldn't allow it to be broadcast and wouldn't allow the evidence to be brought forth by the Russian delegation. I mean, so what's happening is the Western NATO and U.S. are actually not allowing truth to come forward, and they had witnesses and they had documentation that proved the children were not kidnapped. And so you can find it on YouTube, but you can't watch it on the UN website. So what is the US and
But the
UK so
transcripts are still
scared
there.
of that they would actually cut the web?
Yeah,
So
who's the chair
Yeah, but
of
the
the UN
transcripts are
Security
still there,
Council
and I
right
still
now?
have yet
Who's
to
the
hear
chair?
this
any
month,
documents that
the
prove that they
Russian
didn't take these
delegation
children.
is the chair.
No,
It's a
that's the
presidency. They
shocker.
do rotation every month.
Shocker.
I can
Well,
also say this thing that that Eric was saying about sharing personal truth. I can say Jeff was mentioning 2014. I was in Ukraine in 2014 as well, not in any military capacity, but just in a business capacity. And I did see, ethnic cleansing on the side of Ukrainians in Crimea. I mean, people had their businesses taken. People were beaten. Friends of mine had everything stolen from them from Russians who came across the border from Russia, came in and started taking everything. Some were lowballed. Most property was seized by Russian people, and that's something I saw and experienced myself with people that I know. So
Yeah, I
I
wasn't supporting that, but that's still not ethnic cleansing, and I don't support that those actions. But we're not seeing. So I guess what
I
I'm
agree
trying
with
to
you.
say
how
is
is that
we're not
not
seeing
ethnic
Buka
cleansing?
when Ukraine takes over, takes back land. That's my point, basically. If
How
you
is
want
it
to
how is it
boil it
not
down,
like
right?
forcing Ukrainians out of Crimea ethnic cleansing?
Because ethnic cleansing it kind of comes with this idea that you're not providing them the
They're the,
ability to come back either.
and they're
You're
the same
killing them, right?
ethnicity,
Right?
aren't they?
But
Like the
that's what they
Slavic people, aren't
alleged. That's what they alleged the Serbian government to have done in 1998. So I mean, like, if that's the definition of ethnic cleansing, the widely, popularly accepted definition of it. So if Ukraine were to do this and expel every single Russian sympathizer or whatever from Crimea, I mean, that would be the very definition of ethnic cleansing, whether you like it or not, whether you support Ukraine or not.
Could they do
Oh,
that Ian, practically though? Because
that's
like
my fault then.
vast majority of the population is Russian, isn't it? Or
It
Russian
is. It
speaking.
is in that
Yeah,
location. Yes.
I mean, I agree with that.
Well, the reason for that is that
Would be horrific.
Russia invaded Ukraine and kicked out every Ukrainian. I mean, like these people still have the deeds and from their houses that they have that have been taken by Russian nationals. So it's like sort
Every
of a weird
that
thing to
is also
say.
untrue. That's also a bit
Well,
untrue. I mean,
no,
some people
I can
No,
see
that's a
it's
fact.
not untrue.
They
It's
lived there
something.
before.
well, some people
It's
left
something that
willingly, and there's no doubt about it, right? And they're not
leave
captives.
willingly.
I went to school with a friend of
People
mine
lost.
who
You can't make
People
the
lost
lived
claim
in
that they
everything.
Crimea
kicked
and
out
he
every
can't live
single
there anymore
Ukrainian
because
person there. That's absurd. I mean, like,
Well,
if you actually
I
look
can.
at who's in charge of the SMO, it's Ukrainians as well. It's Ukrainians living in Russia who are promoting the SMO because they don't see the regime in Kiev as being legitimate. I mean, a lot of this is not even being. This idea that this is Russian people versus Ukrainian people is that is absurd. That is just patently false.
I don't know where Ian. Again, like, this is from my own personal experience. I'm not on any Telegram groups. I'm not getting my information from any
I'm
like
not getting it
blogs.
from
I'm telling
Telegram
you
groups.
people
I'm
that I
talking to
know.
Ukrainians themselves.
I'm telling you
talking to
people
Ukrainians
that
living in
I
Russia.
know. Telling people I know had their property taken by Russian nationals, were kicked out of Crimea as a result of the invasion from Russia, and they still have all their documents. They still have, like, they had their bank accounts taken. These people still have their deeds to their houses, deeds to the hotels they own, deeds to the business they run that were taken. So, like, if it would be very reasonable for them to go back to Ukraine and reclaim their property, don't you think?
But Mickey,
No, I can't dispute that. I mean, sorry, what were you saying, Sulaiman?
No, sorry. I was gonna say, like, I mean, I need to check up about the veracity of that. But in terms of when I read about this issue, what I read was that it was actually Ukrainians who had committed essentially genocide in Donbass, killing. I think if I remember right, reports were like 14,000 pro-Russian separatists and civilians. So
And mostly
I mean,
children. Yeah. Well, not mostly children, but
multiple
not mostly
children. Yeah.
It's the Alley of Angels, yeah. There's the Alley of Angels, and it keeps getting defaced on Wikipedia. Surprise, surprise, right?
Yeah.
Whenever they add it back in, they add it in the draft mode, so it's technically there, but they won't put it on the front page. It used to be there because it
Is there secondary
that's what we were
sourcing for
talking
that?
about before.
Hold on a second. Are we talking about Crimea or Donbass?
Yeah, because I thought we were talking about Crimea. And
I was
Sulaiman's talking about Donbass.
But
I'm talking
but
about
let's
I was talking about Donbass because they're all essentially
one thing
separate
that you
annexed
all
regions,
haven't really talked about that's happened just in the last few days as well is the way Zelensky has gone in to the Orthodox religion and gone after Russian nationals. And I mentioned it earlier about how now Russian is being banned from being spoken in Orthodox Church in Ukraine. So you have this leader, Zelensky, who has banned opposition parties, banned media, except for friendly Western media, and now is
Not even
going
friendly
after the
Western media.
Orthodox
Even they've been
religion.
expelled. They've been
Wait,
expelled as well.
if China invaded mainland United States, would
And
you want to be watching, CCP news on the TV
So
every
this
day?
this is something
I
that's
Do
think
you
that's
think
kind
the
of just a
BBC is CCP news,
oh,
John? I don't think
this
so.
is something that
You
is
can have whatever
even an
opinions you have.
issue
yeah, but
British
in
Global
my
media,
Times,
but
like,
country where
come
they
on, man,
were
you know what I'm talking
expelled, right?
about.
When they were trying to report on Bucha, they got expelled for reporting on the ground because it kind of showed Ukrainian people Ukrainian soldiers doing not so good things, right?
look, I'm
It
an
was
Listen,
Orthodox
your dear
No,
friend
no,
in
no.
so
It's
that's an
because
Russia.
it's
example
inspiring
because
of,
of
of
the
civilians.
it's
wide
not a
it's widely
democracy.
guys.
Hold
I'm
on.
an Orthodox
No,
Christian. There's no one
the
here who should be
the
more
Russian
upset at
Orthodox
this
Church
than I am.
has actually started to
We're
take
talking about the
orders from
Ukrainian Orthodox
they're-
Church, not the Russian
These are
Orthodox
not
Church,
different.
guys.
This is what you need to
that's not what she
understand.
said, man.
Is like if you actually like read about the five patriarchates and go back to the like Book of Acts and read Callisto's Ware's book about the Orthodox Church, like it's the church. It's the one thing, and I belong to it. No one should be more upset about this than I am. But I recognize you've got a patriarch in St. Petersburg who's saying that everyone in Ukraine who fights against them is like going to hell and is excommunicated, that it's a holy war and they're going after it. Even in my country, in Canada, there's open discussion of deporting the Russian Orthodox Archbishop in
I
Montreal.
hope they do it. Trudeau can show his true colors, right? Just give the
Ian, you know
country
what,
to,
Ian? The
to
Wagner
freeland.
is actually recruiting forces. You should go fight. I mean, if you're this passionate, you should go
Colonel.
fight for Wagner.
That's no, but you know
Rude.
what?
Yeah,
No,
that's
but
just
the
rude, isn't it?
Orthodox really what?
Jeff,
Let's
sorry.
go to the monastery. The
Yeah.
the
I just want to ask
monastery.
Jeff, Tara. I'm going to ask the question. Jeff, I just want to understand this right. I mean, sorry, Tara. This is to you. Are you saying it's the Russian Orthodox Church or the Ukrainian? Now, I understand the Orthodox Church or the Orthodox, but then they have like the argument previously was when the Orthodox Church was banned, it was because it was the Russian and therefore their affiliations to Russia. Are you saying now the non-Russian Orthodox Church has
That is
also
what
been
she's
banned?
saying. Yes, that's exactly what's happening. Yeah, they are
So
arresting people.
Colonel, I mean, Jeff, you said you were an. I
They're
mean,
arresting
what's your
monks and
They're preventing people from praying.
nuns.
There's videos of them beating up parishioners who are
So,
trying to
so
pray.
it's
Yes.
important
They're beating
to
them up.
recognize
They're
that the
desecrating
Hold on.
leader
So let me
of
get
the
Jeff in.
Orthodox
Jeff,
I mean, how
Church.
many examples do you actually need to actually show you that the Orthodox Church, as was brought up, that with a patriarch in St. Petersburg? I mean, I could show you, dead Ukrainian soldiers who all they want to do, all their mom wants to do is take them into the church and show and at least have them there. And the patriarchs or the priests at the church say he's not welcome in this church. You can't bring that dead body into this church because in St. Petersburg they say that anyone who fights for Ukraine is against it. And the mother's sitting there crying because
Jeff, you're not answering the question. Jeff, I've tried to ask you. I understand people like going on their little long stories, but specifically because we're having a discussion, there's only about 5 or 6 of us on here. She specifically, I understand the argument about the St. Petersburg one, so it makes sense to me. Like, even though I may have a problem with it, I can understand the Ukraine side that, look, these guys were subservient to Russia, so this is our reason for it.
They're not subservient to Russia.
I'm saying that's the Ukrainian argument, isn't it?
No.
That's the Ukrainian argument. Yeah, they're calling everybody a spy.
So why did they ban the Russian Orthodox Church then, Captain?
Yeah. So that's what you have to understand is the difference between the newly created Ukrainian Patriarchate, which is part of the Orthodox Church, which was created.
Now I'm talking about the Russian.
Right.
No.
So if you let me speak for 7 seconds, when I identify that I'm going to speak about two things, and I've only said one of those two things, and you interrupt me to say, why haven't you said the second thing yet? It's because you're speaking, sir. And then the second thing we have to identify is the pre-existing Patriarchate of St. Petersburg, which occupies both Muscovy and what we call Russia, and still has remaining institutions in Ukraine. Now, the head of this church, the head of all of it, the ecumenical patriarch, who is, I'll call it Constantinople, on the map it says Istanbul, Bartholomew I, the ecumenical, he's the man in the Orthodox Church. Since the schism of 1054, since, the Pope of Rome is separate, he is now the highest ranking person in Orthodoxy. And even he has come out in public statement and said, the Russian church is fucking up. I have no idea what the hell they're doing, but maybe after this war is over, we'll let them all back in. So that is the level of clarity we're getting from the Orthodox Church. And it was him who created the separate Ukrainian Patriarchate, I think, expressly for the purpose of avoiding this Russian influence in Ukraine.
Another
Okay, but what was the
thing to add is
reason
that
why?
the
My
Russian
question was
Orthodox
more
refused
One second,
to
Mara.
allow
overarching.
I mean,
the
Captain, it is like 7 a.m. here, so I just want to make sure I understood it right. So, I mean, but what is the specific reason why they banned the Russian church?
Espionage.
You said they fucked up espionage.
They're claiming that
And so
the monks
essentially,
and the nuns
that's what I said, subservient, and then you argued, and then you made the same point. So thank you for that. Right, and so, Colonel, so I understand why they banned the Russian church because they were subservient, but what Colonel wanted to say was espionage, which is essentially what.
This NAFO guy's a lot of fun. That's all I'm.
Yeah, it's just word games. But Jeff, the question to you is, why would they ban specifically the Ukrainian church?
This is what you do when you can't admit you're wrong. You just say word games and move on.
No, I'm not. I mean, it's not about wrong. It's just you being childish because you're literally like, it's not subservient. Let me.
I mean,
talk
he
for like
thinks he's a
30 minutes
dog,
and
right?
cry.
He thinks he's a cuck dog. Of course, he's childish. I mean, so he assumes that you're childish as well because he's projecting.
Yeah, exactly.
But this was my point by bringing this up. It was a bigger point, and to the military people that are here, you'll get my bigger point. You're talking about defending democracy as one of the reasons why the U.S. should be in Ukraine and NATO, but yet Zelensky has demonstrated through recent actions regarding the church, regarding press, regarding all of this, it is not a democracy. It is not a democracy. We are not defending a democracy. We are experimenting. And you guys were talking about the fighter pilots and all of that stuff. I mean, excuse me, the planes and all the different kinds of planes. This is actually the U.S. military testing out some of its new equipment and using Ukrainians as cannon fodder, and it's wrong. And we shouldn't. This is blood money that is being earned by the military-industrial complex. That is my point.
Because we made Russia invade Ukraine. Yeah.
No,
yeah,
Russia.
We forced Russia to actually go in and take the Donbass and Crimea. Look, the reason, and by the way, you're 100% wrong on why the U.S. military, folks like me, actually support what's going on in Ukraine. The reason we support it is, for the 30 years that I was in the military, I've read numerous classified reports that actually, and our leadership and our politicians who said that Russia is an existential threat. You can completely disagree with me if you want, but I will tell you that there's tons of documents that actually support that. The reason that I support this war is we had an existential threat that we are now getting by with pennies on the dollar by actually just pushing military equipment in. We have not lost any lives. Ukrainians are willing to do the fighting and dying to actually get their land back. And we are removing an existential threat for literally 10% of what the cost is.
That is fucking insane.
We're going to be able to
That's
pull our
literally insane.
Let me finish, Ian. Stop, Ian.
No,
we're going to be able
that
to
is
pull
literally
our forces
fucking
out
insane.
of.
You are literally fucking insane when you say stuff like that.
All right. Let me say this.
No, but Ian, it comes back
How
to
am I
his point of
insane? That's
basically
100% true.
that you're arguing on a moral level.
This is
things that
fucking
shouldn't be
insanity.
argued
I
on
mean,
that
I
level.
understand where you're coming from. I totally get it. This is where boomers come from, right? You think that Russia's this existential threat to the world, that it needs to be destroyed. I mean, this is the kind of nonsense that Russia has to deal with every single day, and this is why their war is completely justified, if you ask me.
Okay, wait. Let me bring this back.
War, right? I mean, you guys really
misunderstand. I mean, the thing is,
3 days ago, the guy.
Right, guys. Too many people are talking. I'm going to give it to John. Just before I do, I mean, I don't think war's justified from either side. We should never be in a situation where we think war's okay. So yeah, some of this talk is essentially talking points, which are actually what these people are thinking. Like, it's good to go on a war path, essentially, which is for me concerning. Like, I'm not cool with any war or death. John, go ahead.
Yeah. Thank you. So I can't remember who made it because it kind of the point was made so far back. But someone had made the point, and this is kind of how when I approach geopolitical issues and defense issues, I also stress that I am not in the military. I don't want people to confuse stolen valor. I do take that seriously. I have many friends and family in the force. So, but one thing I will say though is someone had mentioned before the idea of that they're noticing everyone's arguing geopolitical matters, and even worse, and I don't want to say worse because that there are things, war is intrinsically bad, right? It shouldn't happen. Um, um, but you're arguing these things and you're trying to figure out why people are doing things, but you're arguing from a totally wrong standpoint, and you're never going to get to the why if you continue to argue geopolitical stratagems from a moral standpoint, because you're not going to understand why Putin invaded, right? Because I understand why Putin invaded, and to me, right, it makes sense. I can see how he can think, or how he can frame, or how he could be threatened by NATO. I can understand that if you look at it from a geopolitical standpoint. I can also see how he maybe thought that Ukraine was going to roll over because he didn't take into account certain defense measures and aid sent by Western nations. That's not me arguing from a moral level. That's just me saying, looking at the facts and saying what's going on the ground, and how I interpret the situation. I can be wrong once the situation plays out, as we kind of saw Putin being very drastically wrong about Ukraine's force posture. But that he's not sitting there. So I think when you see countries, put forth these moral dilemmas and stuff, that's not for the casus belli, right, or the reason for war. That's just to convince you guys that to let them do it, right? Let's convince us to let them do it, right?
So I think you followed up Eric's point sort of rather nicely in allowing us discuss one thing and come to the truth. Is you've expressed something that is one of your values that I don't share. Now you're in good company because you said what Dr. Kissinger said, which is you can't use the personal morality of individuals and apply them to countries. That's not how we do statecraft. I believe the opposite of that. I think that world leaders have an obligation to make the world better and should make choices that achieve things like peace and prosperity. But now that we've agreed...
Oh, I wasn't trying to say that.
Okay, then I misunderstood you, and I'm sorry.
Yeah. So I was saying I wasn't trying to say that my moral standpoint is that I believe that any country should basically do what it wants because if it sees it as good for the country. But I understand that that's why they're doing it. So you kind of also kind of helped me out a bit. But yeah.
I
Yeah, no,
wanted
thanks
to
for that,
bring up
John.
a
1 second,
historical
Tara.
point.
Yeah.
A historical point. In
Right, guys. It's now 7:20 in the UK, so I do appreciate everybody taking the time out to listen. We've had a long, 8-9 hours of discussion. Panelists have changed. We've discussed a variety of topics, a variety of areas. We will be back tomorrow. Most likely the same topic, but it could be something else depending on the news. I do appreciate everybody's time. And yeah, just thanks. So 1 second, sorry guys. So I do appreciate your time, and make sure you check out the newsletter that is pinned up on the top, and it does provide you with an overview of all of the information that we've discussed.